Chapter 838. Strictly speaking, Forbes magazine's estimate of Eric's net worth was $98.7 billion. Eric's current assets mainly included Firefly Group and Firefly Investments. Firefly Group controlled more than 20 subsidiaries in film, TV, theme parks, comics, music, and special effects. Its fixed assets alone had reached $50 billion. In 1996, Firefly's actual annual revenue was $31.3 billion, which was almost 1.5 times the combined revenue of Time Warner and Viacom. The market value of Time Warner and Viacom were $24.3 billion and $28.8 billion respectively. Therefore, Forbes' estimate of $85 billion for Firefly Group was not an exaggeration. Eric held 73.7% of Firefly Group shares, which was worth $62.7 billion. On the other hand, Firefly invested heavily in companies such as Cisco, Nokia, and AOL. Because most of them were listed, it was easier to estimate the value of their assets. According to various public data, Eric's assets were worth about $36 billion. The sum of the two was exactly $98.7 billion given by Forbes magazine. Westerners generally worshipped miracles and individual heroism. But when some miracles far exceeded their knowledge, they would often have doubts. Eric's personal net worth was $98.7 billion. Compared to Bill Gates's $36.4 billion, it was a whole $62.3 billion higher. This kind of disparity in data gave too many people a strong sense of unreality. Therefore, it was almost inevitable that people would question it. In order to resolve the possible antitrust investigation risk caused by Forbes magazine's portrayal of Firefly Group as a media oligarch, Eric used this doubt to cleverly turn the media's topic in the following days to himself. After the latest publication of Forbes magazine, financial reporters and critics who could only publish articles criticizing Eric's personal net worth in low-circulation professional journals or second- and third-tier newspapers received articles from mainstream North American newspapers and magazines. They wanted to discuss their views on the latest issue of Forbes' Rich List. Of course, these media people didn't know that Eric was the one behind this matter. Publishing articles on influential media platforms such as the Washington Post, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Yahoo Finance was also the best way to expand one's personal influence. So, they all rubbed their hands and racked their brains, and a detailed article was quickly published. Some of them also realized that the media platforms that asked them for articles had a close relationship with Firefly Group or Eric himself. However, as media people who at least ostensibly pursued freedom of speech, they certainly would not easily change their opinions. When many people submitted articles that they thought might be contrary to the media platform's expectations, they even made up their minds to argue with the other party to show their strength of character. Unexpectedly, these articles were published without any hindrance. For a time, most media outlets in North America questioned the accuracy of Forbes magazine's data and criticized Eric Williams's personal net worth for being seriously overestimated. US $98.7 billion, a sensationalist number game. The grossly overrated Yahoo. The profit margin of the IT industry is generally low. Firefly Investment Company's US $36 billion valuation is seriously inflated. Net profit of US $1.76 billion. Firefly Group's net interest rate has seriously shrunk. Under the sudden and powerful attack, in order to maintain their credibility, Forbes naturally fought back. For a time, the two sides argued fiercely in print media, television, and even online platforms. Most of the focus of the news was on how much money Eric had. Because the side that opposed Forbes magazine's data was too powerful, in the end, most ordinary people unknowingly accepted the opposition's point of view and treated Forbes magazine's data as a sensationalist joke. Under the repeated bombardment of information, most people generally believed that Eric's actual personal net worth was around US $60 billion. Although it was still much higher than the second place on the list, it was still easier to accept than a figure close to US $100 billion. This was exactly the result that Eric wanted to see. After a week of arguing, the topic naturally began to cool down. However, very few media outlets paid attention to the media oligarchy argument that Forbes magazine threw out. Even if some sensitive media people realized that there were traces of manipulation, it was difficult for them to find any direct evidence. After all, Eric's manipulation this time was very clever. He only allowed people with certain viewpoints to speak more in the media and then caused the entire media circle to follow suit. There were always too many people in the world who did not know the purpose of their opinions. In the blink of an eye, a new weekend had arrived. A new piece of explosive news swept the media's last bit of interest in the Forbes rich list into a corner and quickly focused on this matter. This was the new week's box office data of Titanic. A series of miraculous box office data had refreshed many people's understanding of traditional movie box office data. News about Titanic had gone beyond the film and television industry to become a social topic. After another week of reaction, because the Oscars would be held next Monday, fans of Titanic in North America were looking forward to the moment when the film's domestic box office exceeded US $500 million. Therefore, compared to the previous week, the box office of Titanic in North America fell again, reaching US $23 million. The total box office reached US $492 million, only one step away from US $500 million. However, what caught the media's attention was not the shocking box office data in North America, but the overseas box office data. Last week, after a few months of strong publicity, the number of countries and regions where Titanic was released overseas had increased by 17, and the total number of overseas ticket sales had reached 46, including France, Germany, and Japan, the three most important overseas ticket sales countries. Obviously, Titanic had created a series of miracles in North America. Whether in terms of box office or award nominations, the audience in these newly released overseas countries had the highest expectations. Therefore, after a new week, the box office of Titanic, in 46 countries and regions overseas, had reached a jaw-dropping US $179 million. Before this, Titanic had been released in countries and regions overseas. Although the release date was uncertain, the cumulative box office only reached US $400 million after 12 weeks in North America. In just 1 week, with the help of the 17 new countries that opened their box office, the overseas box office of Titanic was close to half of the cumulative box office of the previous 12 weeks in just 1 week. This was definitely a miracle. Among these newly released countries, it was no surprise that the box office performance of France, Germany, and Japan was the most eye-catching. The box office of the first week in France was $28 million, Germany was $26 million, and Japan was an astonishing $49 million. Just these three major box office contributed US $103 million to the total box office of Titanic in 1 week. Although the remaining 43 countries and regions only provided an average of US $1.7 million per box office, the overall box office of US $76 million was still far higher than the average of the previous 12 weeks. Considering that the overseas box office of France, Germany, and Japan may have a similar box office curve as North America, and that there would still be 22 countries releasing in the next period, many box office agencies boldly predicted that Titanic, in the next week, with the help of the Oscar awards and the new box office, the overseas box office was likely to exceed the miraculous US $200 million. In this era, 99% of Hollywood films may not necessarily reach US $200 million in the overseas box office, but Titanic may achieve this feat in 1 week. At this time, under the stimulation of the US $179 million overseas box office explosion, the global box office of Titanic had exceeded US $1,071 million. If the overseas box office of Titanic could maintain the scale of US $200 million in a single week in the next few weeks, the global box office of Titanic would reach US $2 billion, which was no longer an unattainable number. With a global box office of US $2 billion, just the box office data alone would bring in a net profit of US $500 million for Firefly Group. Most of the time, the total net profit of the 7 major Hollywood film businesses may not necessarily reach US $500 million, let alone one movie. Moreover, the box office revenue was just the beginning. Because the box office data was too outrageous, although the peripheral income such as the videotapes and soundtracks in the later stages certainly could not be calculated according to the traditional income ratio, It was conceivable that this part of the income would still be a terrifying astronomical figure. During the entire profit cycle of Titanic, through the operation of the entire industrial chain, it was not impossible for Firefly Group to recover a profit of US $2 billion equivalent to the box office number. Originally, most people only expected the global box office of Titanic to be a little more than $1 billion US dollars. At this time, it suddenly jumped to the level of $2 billion US dollars. Stimulated by this terrifying profit, Hollywood studios became even more eager for big production projects. This weekend, Eric could finally rest a little. However, it was impossible for him to completely relax. After all, next Monday was the Academy Awards ceremony. This time, because My Heart Will Go On was nominated for the Best Original Song Oscar, Eric would definitely attend. Speaking of which, it was quite interesting. Since 1988, Eric had produced many movies, but so far, he had not won the Best Director award. However, he had been nominated for the Best Screenplay and Best Original Song Oscar, and he had already won the Academy Award for the former. This time, no surprise, he would definitely win another Academy Award. In a living room of the Pointy Corner Villa, Eric stretched out his arms and let the identical twins help him put on his suit. He asked the girl standing next to a Givenchy store customer manager with great interest, "Baby, look, I've already won the Best Original Screenplay Award. This time, it shouldn't be too much of a problem to win another Academy Award for Best Original Song Oscar. Then, from now on, will I continue to win these peripheral awards, such as Best Special Effects, Best Editing, Best Soundtrack, and so on? I'll win all the awards one by one." "Oh, what's that saying? A Grand Slam?" The girl laughed and said, "You definitely won't be able to get a Grand Slam, because you're a man." "Okay, I mean..." Eric also remembered that he would definitely not win the Best Supporting Actress or Best Supporting Actress awards in this lifetime. He continued, "I can win those. You won't be able to win the Best Supporting Actor and Best Actor either." The girl curled her lips. Of course, she knew what Eric was thinking, so she continued to attack him. Everyone chuckled softly. The Natasha sisters buttoned up Eric's black suit and quietly stood next to him. Eric had no interest in trying on clothes. He was more used to buying all kinds of identical clothes and wearing them all the time. However, this time, the girl wanted to walk the red carpet with Eric, so she insisted that he try on a suit that matched his suit. Eric didn't understand why these black suits that looked similar to each other had to be tried on repeatedly. Drew obviously saw Eric's impatience. He walked over and looked him up and down. He whispered a few words to the female Givenchy customer manager with a good figure and said, "Okay, this will be it. Natasha, take off your clothes. The sleeves need to be slightly altered." After tidying up the suit, Drew personally sent the Givenchy customer manager away. Eric left the living room in a relaxed manner. He walked to the sofa by the glass wall and lay down. He stretched his body comfortably and picked up a magazine to read. Drew soon came back. When he saw Eric lying on the sofa, he grinned and leaned over Eric. He said, "Okay, Eric, I'm done trying." "Uh-huh." Eric threw away the magazine in his hand and hugged the girl's soft waist. He squinted his eyes lazily. The girl blew a few warm breaths in Eric's ear and said, "But there are still shoes. They'll send them over soon." "Pa." There was a crisp sound in the air. "Hee, it hurts." Drew twisted his body and smiled. "This time, it's custom-made. You just have to try it on and see if it fits." Eric was satisfied. Chapter 839. Everyone originally expected that the North American box office of Titanic would not exceed US $500 million until the end of the 14th week. But in fact, early in the morning of March 23, the news that the North American box office of Titanic had exceeded US $500 million appeared in the major North American newspapers. On Friday and Saturday of the 14th week, Titanic achieved US $5 million and US $6 million, respectively, pushing the total box office of Titanic to US $504 million in one fell swoop, becoming the first film in North American history to exceed US $500 million at the local box office. Stimulated by this series of news, many media outlets predicted that the ratings of this year's 69th Oscar Awards ceremony would also reach a miraculous number. As for the specific number, many media outlets used a joking tone to express that, just like the box office of Titanic, this number was also unpredictable. Under the watchful eyes of the public, on the afternoon of March 24th, the 69th Oscar Awards ceremony was officially held in the Sacred Civic Auditorium in Los Angeles. After a leisurely weekend, Eric did not have any sense of urgency to attend the awards ceremony. In the morning, he received a call from Cameron and brought Drew to Firefly Studios. When he heard that Eric wanted to move all the props of Titanic, including the large ship model, to Firefly Studios and set up a theme exhibition, Cameron was very excited to take over the job and even got the title of chief engineer. With the help of the dream engineers under Firefly, Cameron quickly drew an open space in the southwest corner of the studio and began the preliminary planning. In order to make more detailed changes to the interior of the Titanic model, Cameron even applied for a US $10 million fund. If it was in the past, the company would definitely not agree to spend US $10 million on such a project. But this time, even Katzenberg, who was not on good terms with Cameron, did not hesitate to approve it. Although many people in the group were not optimistic about the Titanic theme exhibition project, in the face of the box office miracle of Titanic, the company did not care about spending another US $10 million. Even if the theme exhibition in the future was not very good, this project would still become a very memorable cultural symbol inside Firefly Studios. The 270-meter-long ship model was almost 4 times the size of the largest studio in the studio. In the eyes of anyone, such a landmark building was very shocking. Eric was with the girl in the morning, listening to Cameron describe his plan in the empty space in the movie theater that had yet to be developed. After the model materials of the Titanic were shipped back from Mexico, Cameron not only wanted to set up a restaurant, exhibition hall, and other spaces inside, but also wanted to restore most of the scenes that appeared in the movie. Obviously, although the production process burned more than US $200 million, many of Cameron's ideas were not presented in the movie. This theme exhibition project became a channel for him to make up for his regrets. In addition to Titanic, Red Alert, which was produced by Catherine, was also nominated for many Oscars. The company was in charge of arranging for the relevant main creators to participate in the award ceremony. Eric and Camille stayed at Firefly Studios until 5 in the afternoon. Then, Cameron's wife, Linda Hamilton, rushed over from their home in Beverly Hills. Eric took the girl and the Camerons to the Sacred Civic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles. Sitting in the luxurious limousine, Eric was flipping through a magazine in boredom. Beside him, a girl in a light blue gown stuck her head out of the window and looked ahead. Then, she turned around and said, "Eric, did you notice that Jim and Linda almost didn't talk to each other anymore?" Of course, it was impossible for Eric not to notice. In fact, Cameron and Linda Hamilton's relationship had been problematic for a long time. Now, they just lacked an opportunity to divorce. However, during the shooting of Titanic this time, Cameron's fifth wife, Susie Amos, did not participate in the shooting. Eric did not have the bad taste of matchmaking. Therefore, Cameron and Linda Hamilton might make do for a few more years before divorcing. "When did you start to care about this kind of thing?" Eric asked casually without looking up. "I'm just curious," the girl said. Suddenly, she sighed and said with a bit of bitterness, "Why can't a man always like a woman?" Although the girl had always shown a carefree and indifferent attitude towards Eric's flirtatious behavior, which woman could really be completely relieved? Eric could not help but feel a little apologetic. He subconsciously began to make up a story. This is determined by the genetic instinct of males. If you want to get to the bottom of it, you probably have to trace it back to the origin of life 3.8 billion years ago. Noticing Eric's awkward look, the girl giggled. She pulled one of Eric's hands and rubbed it on her tender face. Then she put it to her mouth and gently bit it. She said, "Eric, I know you care about me a lot." Eric said shamelessly, "Although this is the truth, I'm still very pleased that you can see it." "Ha ha," the girl continued to laugh and took the initiative to explain, "because you never touch Natasha and the others." Eric held the girl's little hand and squeezed it. He smiled and said, "Actually, I'm afraid that they will hit me." "You know they won't." The two leaned against each other for a moment. The car soon drove into the street where the Sacred Citizen Auditorium was located near the University of Southern California. Under the arrangement of the staff of the Oscar organizers, the car slowly drove to the entrance of the Oscar red carpet after a short pause. Warm cheers could be faintly heard outside. It should be the Cameron couple appearing on the red carpet. Eric got out of the car first and turned to the other side of the RV. He held the girl's little hand and the two stepped onto the red carpet together. In the past 2 years, Eric appeared in public less and less. However, due to the influence of his multiple identities and the controversy caused by Forbes magazine some time ago, his popularity did not show any signs of decline. As soon as he stepped onto the red carpet, the fans on both sides cheered. When they passed through the media area, the reaction of the media reporters was even more intense. In order to take better photos, they even completely ignored the usual rules and shouted the names of Eric and Natasha loudly, hoping that they would stay a little longer. Eric did not completely ignore the enthusiasm of these people. He held the girl's waist for a moment and looked at the camera with a smile. After a burst of crazy flashes, Eric continued to walk with the girl. The live broadcast of ABC TV quickly swept over. Eric looked at Cameron, who was being interviewed not far away. He smiled and asked Drew next to him, "Do you want to go up and say a few words?" The girl smiled and said, "They definitely want you to go up. I'm just here to join in the fun." "Then forget it. Let's go straight to the front," Eric said. He saw a staff member in charge of the broadcast of ABC make a gesture of inquiry at him, so he shook his head slightly. Although they wanted their boss to go up for a few interviews, after all, Eric had been a hot topic recently. Even if they casually talked about something insignificant, it would definitely attract a wave of ratings. However, since Eric refused, no one dared to force their boss. The camera swept over the two of them and quickly looked for the next target. They passed through the interview area of ABC and came to the crowd gathering area at the end of the red carpet. As soon as Eric and Drew appeared at the end of the red carpet, a large number of eyes gathered on them. Some familiar people also came over to greet them. The first to greet them were Harvey Wayne, Stan, Julia, and the others from the Shakespeare in Love crew. Because of the strength of Titanic, the possibility of Shakespeare in Love winning an award this time was very small. The two sides were close, and Mira Mike could not use some special means to force public relations. Therefore, after the Golden Globe Awards and the Oscar nomination, in order to avoid unnecessary consumption of resources, Mira Mike completely gave up on the award public relations. Because of this strategy, Julia was unlikely to win the Best Actress award this time like Gwyneth Paltrow in the past. So far, the box office of Shakespeare in Love in North America was more than $60 million, and there was not much momentum left. It was difficult to reach the $100 million in the North American box office in his previous life. However, because this was an indie film, Julia signed a contract with a salary and share. She only received a low salary of $3 million, and the final cost of the movie was only $25 million. Mira Mike had already made a small profit just from the North American box office alone, not to mention the overseas box office and videotape income in the future. Eric hugged Julia. Seeing that she subconsciously wanted to knock her chin on his shoulder, he quickly pinched her slender waist wrapped in a black dress. Julia woke up and let go of Eric, a little embarrassed. Harvey did not seem to notice Julia's gaffe at all. He shook hands with Eric with a smile and said, "Eric, maybe I should congratulate you in advance." Eric said modestly, "It's still a little too early. Who knows if the Oscar judges will have other thoughts?" "No, no, no." Harvey shook his head firmly and said, "Maybe there will be some changes in the popular films in the past, but definitely not this time. The Oscar committee will know what to choose." "I hope so." Eric nodded and gestured to the people around him. He said, "Then, I'll see you after the award ceremony. You should be going to the Vanity Fair party, right?" "Yes, about a film next year. I happened to meet a few actors later, and they all came over today." Harvey nodded. He knew that many people were still waiting to greet Eric, so he quickly said, "By the way, Eric, the ratings for The Masked Tao Family are getting better and better. Maybe we should find some time to talk about the next self-produced series." Of course, I should be free in the next few days. After chatting for a while, Eric brought the girl and turned to the others. Firefly had 2 films that received a lot of nominations this year, namely Titanic and Red Alert. However, many people knew very well that although there were many outstanding films this year, most of them were just there to accompany the others. Titanic was almost guaranteed to win most of the Oscars. Catherine had already won the Best Director award for Saving Private Ryan. This time, she looked very calm. The woman was wearing a black silk corset dress that made her look even taller. Standing in the crowd, she looked like a crane in a flock of chickens. When Eric walked over, Catherine was talking about something with the screenwriter of Red Alert, Terrence Malick. It seemed to be a new movie. When Eric asked about it, the woman seemed a little indifferent. After a short conversation, Eric dealt with a few more waves of people before walking to the set of Titanic. The girl, who had been quietly hanging by Eric's side, had an inexplicable smile on her face since the beginning. While Eric was temporarily free, she whispered in his ear, "Eric, did you coax her into bed?" Eric asked knowingly, "Who?" "Hee, the way she looked at me just now was very interesting." Eric tried to recall, but he did not notice anything strange about Catherine just now. He did not even feel that Catherine looked at the girl, so he asked, "Why didn't I feel it?" "Because you're a man. Of course, we women are more sensitive about this kind of thing." The girl smiled and said with certainty, "She's jealous." "How is that possible? Don't talk nonsense." Eric interrupted the girl. After the charming and gentle encounter in Australia, Eric only invited Catherine for a few meals at the end of last year. The woman's personality was too strong, and Eric did not want to offend the beauty. There was no substantial progress in the relationship between the two sides. Because he did not get nominated for Best Actor, Shaoli refused to attend the award ceremony as usual. The crew did not force him, and Eric did not intervene in this matter. In fact, he was happy to see it happen. After all, in the next 20 years, without Shaoli and the Oscars, Hollywood would lack a lot of fun. Although Shaoli did not come, the crew of Titanic was still the most conspicuous group of people in the crowd. Everyone exchanged pleasantries and entered the auditorium as the award ceremony approached. At 7 o'clock, in the Sacred Civic Auditorium, Billy Crystal stood on the bow of the Titanic model and slowly appeared on the stage. He even imitated Shaoli in the movie and shouted a few times. It was very funny. In the warm applause, Billy Crystal walked to the center of the stage, spread his hands, and looked at the auditorium that could accommodate thousands of people. He said, "Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Titanic. We are very big and very expensive. Everyone hopes that we can hurry up. Now, let's begin." In the music, Billy Crystal's iconic opening song rang out. Chapter 840. Billy Crystal used a lively song to poke fun at all the nominated films. The award ceremony officially began. Julianne Drew, a veteran Hollywood actress who had starred in Man of Joy and The Sound of Music, was the first to go on stage to present the Oscar honorary award to Hollywood director Michael Kidd. Eric didn't know this veteran director who was over 80 years old, but he remembered the previous honorary award winner, Kirk Douglas, Michael Douglas' father. The second award was for the Best Costume Design for Titanic. Julia stepped onto the podium as the guest presenter and began to introduce the list of nominees. The atmosphere in the auditorium seemed to be much quieter at this moment. Although almost everyone predicted that Titanic would be the biggest winner tonight, the outcome was still uncertain. There were always variables and suspense. The nominated films obviously couldn't be compared to Titanic in terms of costume design. If Titanic didn't get this good start, then the final results of the remaining 13 nominations would be overshadowed. The nominees for Best Costume Design are Sandy Powell for Shakespeare in Love, Paul Brown for The Blue Storm, Ruth Myers for Emma, Alexandra Blaney for Hamlet, and Deborah Scott for Titanic. The gorgeous outfits from the corresponding movies flashed on the big screen one by one. Then, Julia opened the envelope in front of her and glanced at the results. However, she didn't immediately approach the microphone. Instead, she subconsciously looked at Eric with a smile on her face, as if she was asking for credit. Eric immediately understood and made a random gesture to Julia before the live camera swept over. Although some people in the audience noticed this brief detail, except for Eric himself, most people only subconsciously took this smile as a congratulatory gesture. After receiving Eric's hint, Julia immediately approached Mike as if nothing had happened and announced, "The Oscar goes to Deborah Scott for Titanic." As expected, the auditorium was immediately filled with warm applause. In the back of the auditorium, a woman in her early 40s stood up excitedly and hugged her husband. Then, she walked to the front row where the creators of Titanic were sitting and shook hands with them one by one. Eric, who was sitting in the middle of the third row, also stood up and reached out to shake hands with Deborah Scott in the aisle. With the Best Costume Design Award, Titanic won 3 technical awards in a row: Best Editing, Best Sound Effects, and Best Visual Effects. In just half an hour, they had already won 4 Oscars. After another award for Best Foreign Language Film, which had nothing to do with Titanic, was presented, the urbane Pierce Brosnan took the stage and introduced Celine Dion to perform Titanic's theme song, "My Heart Will Go On." The heavenly music echoed in the Sacred Citizen Auditorium. Eric thought that the organizers would take the opportunity to award the Best Original Song. Unexpectedly, it was Nicolas Cage who went on stage and introduced the nominees for Best Actress. Among the 5 nominees, there were no nominees who had an overwhelming advantage. In this case, if Titanic hadn't appeared out of nowhere, with Mira Mike's strong public relations ability, Julia might have had a great chance of winning the Best Actress award. However, with the strong performance of Titanic, Mira Mike gave up on the public relations for Shakespeare's Love in order to save money and resources. Julia's chances of winning the Best Actress award plummeted. As for Rachel Weisz, although her performance in the movie was much better than Xiao Li's, for a newcomer like her, an Oscar nomination for Best Actress was already the best reward for her. Her chances of winning the award were much slimmer than Julia's. In the public relations strategy drawn up by Firefly, they didn't spend too much effort on Rachel's nomination. In the end, the Best Actress award fell to Frances McDormand, the lead actress of Frozen Bloodstorm. This Hollywood actress debuted with the Coen brothers' first film, Blood Labyrinth. Many years later, she won the Best Actress Oscar again with the Coen brothers' film. It was also a good story. In the next few awards, Best Art Director and Best Original Screenplay added 2 more Oscars to Titanic. When Cameron walked backstage with the Oscars in hand, amid the warm applause of everyone, Eric raised his hand to look at his watch. The award ceremony had been going on for exactly an hour. It seemed that the organizers had put a lot of thought into the order of the awards for the sake of ratings. Eric couldn't help but guess that the Best Original Song award related to him would be awarded in an hour and a half or 2. While Eric was thinking, the next presenter, Courtney Love, began to announce the nominee for Best Makeup on stage. Eric immediately perked up. Because this award was crucial to whether Titanic could break the record of 11 Oscars won by Ben-Hur. Out of the 14 nominations for Titanic, other than Rachel, who had little hope of winning the Best Actress nomination, there were 2 other factors that would affect whether the film would be able to break Ben-Hur's record. One was the Best Supporting Actress, and the other was the Best Makeup Artist. Although Titanic had an overwhelming advantage over the other nominees in terms of costume design, it didn't have an obvious advantage in terms of makeup. This was because there was another very important competitor in the same period, which was The Fat Professor, released by Universal Pictures last summer. Eddie Murphy, a black male star with a standard body, played a wonderful role in The Fat Professor, as a fat man who weighed more than 100 pounds through makeup. Only 3 films were nominated for Best Makeup: Titanic, The Fat Professor, and Star Trek: First Contact. After introducing the nominated films, Courtney Love opened the envelope in her hand. Eric couldn't help but shake the girl's little hand next to him. "So, the Oscars will belong to..." Courtney Love smiled and paused for a moment to keep the audience in suspense. Then, she read out the list of winners: Tina Earnshaw, Gray Cannon, Simon Thompson, and Titanic. Congratulations. The auditorium was filled with applause again. The 3 winning makeup artists walked to the stage one after another. This was already the 7th Oscar winner for Titanic. The guests present were already in a state of numbness. Most of them did not know what this Oscar winner might mean to Titanic. After Eric and the core creators of the film congratulated the three makeup artists, they sat down again. Cameron, the two producers, John Landau and William Stewart, looked at him. They exchanged excited glances. The 6 Oscars before the Best Makeup Award completely showed that the Oscar jury had compromised for the huge commercial success of Titanic. The biggest suspense of this award ceremony was whether Titanic could break the record of 11 Oscars that Ben-Hur had previously set. When the Best Makeup Award was won, most of the guests present and the audience eagerly waiting for the final result in front of the TV did not understand what this award meant. However, the main creators and the public relations team of Titanic, who had gone through countless deductions during the public relations stage, were very clear about the significance of this award. Winning the Best Makeup Award almost meant that Titanic was likely to win 12 Oscars in the end, creating a new record in the history of the Oscars. Just as Eric had guessed, when the award ceremony was 2 hours old, the veteran Hollywood actress Goldie Hawn went on stage to present the Best Original Song Award. At first, Eric had hoped that Cameron, James Horner and himself would sign the award together. After all, he had only written the lyrics and music score. The arrangement and recording of the song had been done by Cameron and James Horner alone. With Eric's current status, he did not care if he won the Oscars alone. However, when the award was submitted, Cameron and James Horner declined to sign the award. The public relations team also felt that if Eric signed the award alone, it would be more beneficial for the public relations and later publicity of the award. Therefore, he was the only one on the final list. Before the award ceremony, Madonna had just gone on stage to perform the song You Must Love Me, which was the most threatening song to My Heart Will Go On from the movie Mrs. Varon. Obviously, the Oscars organizers had deliberately created this segment to create suspense, but the result was not suspenseful. Goldie Hawn quickly opened the envelope and announced the result. The Oscar goes to Eric Williams for My Heart Will Go On. The audience burst into the loudest applause since the beginning of the award ceremony, and some people even cheered. Eric smiled and got up. He hugged the girl next to him and left his seat. He greeted Cameron, John Landau, William Stewart, Rachel, and the others one by one before he stepped onto the stage. Taking the Oscars from Goldie Hawn, Eric hugged the charming first-generation American sweetheart and walked to Mike. As Eric stood in front of the microphone, the applause that had subsided became enthusiastic again. Thank you everyone," Eric politely expressed his gratitude and patiently waited for the applause to stop. Then, he weighed the Oscars in his hand and joked, "I think I should make it clear in advance. Actually, I am a director." After a short silence, the guests quickly understood the self-mockery in Eric's words and laughed. Eric was a director, and no one doubted that he was definitely one of the best directors in Hollywood. However, now that he had stood on the Oscar podium twice, the awards that Eric won had nothing to do with the Best Director award. This was a very interesting thing. While giving his acceptance speech, Eric could not help but think of the joke he made with the girl when he was trying on clothes 2 days ago. Would he really win the Oscars? Although Eric certainly did not have much hope for acting awards, and he was not very interested in these awards, other than Best Screenplay, Best Score, and other technical awards such as Best Editing, he was still confident that he could try. After a simple speech, Eric followed Goldie Hawn backstage. Sitting in the auditorium for 2 hours straight was not a good feeling for anyone. Eric was not in a hurry to go back. After ordering the nameplate for the Oscars and accepting a short photo interview, Eric went to the lounge. In the lounge, there were also many guests who were lazy and did not rush to the auditorium. The Oscars had a special seat filler who occupied the original seats when the guests left so that the empty seats would not appear out of place. Therefore, as long as they did not pay special attention, the audience would not notice that a guest had left halfway. After Eric appeared, everyone eagerly gathered to greet him. After all, Eric was now not just a director. Even if they were familiar with him, they would gain unexpected benefits in the future. Eric had just chatted with Al Pacino when a soft female voice sounded behind him. "Hey, Eric, congratulations." Eric turned around and saw that Madonna, who had just performed You Must Love Me on stage, had changed into another light gown in such a short time and was standing behind him with a smile. Eric politely extended his hand to Madonna and said, "Thank you, Miss Ciccone. Your performance just now was also very wonderful." Madonna shook Eric's hand and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. "Oh, Eric, you can call me Maggie." Maggie. Eric was a little nervous. This nickname, it would be better to just call Her Majesty Queen. Feeling his palm being gently scratched a few times, Eric suddenly realized that he had been inexplicably distracted. He noticed that Madonna was looking at him with a smile. Slightly embarrassed, he let go of her hand and shrugged. "Sorry, Maggie." Whether in his previous life or now, Eric's understanding of Madonna was limited to, "Auntie, let's put on our clothes properly." Therefore, he did not have any special feelings for this female star. Madonna was obviously interested in him. She pointed to the sofa in the corner of the lounge and said, "Eric, how about sitting over there?" Eric subconsciously wanted to refuse, but suddenly remembered the Yahoo Music Store and nodded in agreement. Madonna was definitely a top singer in the European and American music industry, comparable to Michael Jackson. If Yahoo Music could get the online sales rights of Madonna's music, it would definitely take a big step forward in the development of the online music sales platform. The two sat down on the sofa in the corner. Madonna asked her assistant to pour coffee. Then she looked at Eric with interest again. Seeing that he was empty-handed, she smiled and said, "Eric, where's your Oscar?" "Oh, my assistant put it away for me." Eric pointed to Peter Ritchie, who was standing not far away. Madonna joked, "Hee, if I win the award, I'll definitely hold on to the Oscar all night." Eric teased, "So, every time after the Grammys, you go to bed with a pile of trophies?" Madonna charmingly glanced at Eric and said, "Do you want to see me in bed with a pile of trophies?" Eric immediately shook his head. "No." Madonna was stunned and laughed. She said, "That's so sad, Eric. Speaking of which, My Heart Will Go On will definitely be the big winner of next year's Grammys. Maybe you will also be invited. Or perhaps, you should have been invited 6 years ago. I still have the single record of New Divide from back then. It's a pity that you don't seem to care much about that." "That's your territory. I won't join in the fun," Eric said. He didn't want Madonna to continue the conversation. Just as he was about to take the initiative to mention the Yahoo Music Store, there was a slight commotion at the entrance to the stage. Peter Ritchie hurried over and said, "Mr. Williams, Ms. Stewart won the Best Supporting Actress award." Eric stood up in surprise. After winning the Best Makeup award, Eric didn't have much hope for the Best Supporting Actress award. After all, Gloria Stewart was competing for the Best Supporting Actress award with the legendary actress of the golden age of Hollywood, Lauren Bacall. Gloria Stewart couldn't compare to Lauren Bacall in terms of qualifications and fame. Moreover, if Titanic could win 12 Oscars and break the record, everyone would be very satisfied. Unexpectedly, the Best Supporting Actress award, which was about the same as Rachel's Best Actress award, also won. After calming down a little, Eric asked Peter Ritchie, "How many awards has she won?" 10, Peter Ritchie said. He then added, "Now, for Titanic, there are only 3 nominations left: Best Score, Best Director, and Best Picture. James Horner was nominated for Best Original Score, Cameron was nominated for Best Director, and finally, Best Picture." At this point, was there still any suspense about these 3 nominations? Without a doubt, this meant that the number of Oscars awarded to Titanic would reach an unprecedented 13. Chapter 841. During the conversation, the 87-year-old Gloria Stewart, who played the role of Rose, slowly walked backstage with the help of the crowd. "Then Maggie, I'll see you at the Vanity Fair party." Now was definitely not the time to talk about the Yahoo Music Store. Eric said goodbye to Madonna and walked towards Gloria Stewart. The old lady had already been helped to sit down on the sofa. Although the award ceremony had been going on for more than 2 hours, Gloria Stewart was still in a very good state of mind. From time to time, she reached out and stroked the golden statuette that was held in the hands of the previous Best Supporting Actor winner, Kevin Spacey. She smiled and murmured, "Incredible, really incredible." As one of the female stars of the Golden Age, Gloria Stewart had faded out of the circle as early as the mid-1940s. Therefore, This was the first time she had been nominated for an Oscar and won an award. Eric walked over and shook the old lady's hand to congratulate her. Everyone chatted for a while. The old lady did not agree to her daughter's suggestion to go back to rest early. Instead, she wanted to witness the final moment. Eric personally helped the old lady back to the auditorium. As soon as they returned to their seats, the previous Best Director winner, Robert Zemeckis, had already stepped onto the stage and began to introduce the nominees for Best Director. Close-up shots of the 5 nominees for Best Director appeared on the big screen one by one. Robert Zemeckis opened the envelope and announced a name that was no longer in doubt. The Oscar will go to James Cameron for Titanic. Amidst the applause and cheers, everyone around the Titanic crew stood up. Eric also stood up and clapped while looking at Cameron, who was hugging everyone in the back row. Because he was sitting in the middle, when he saw Cameron coming over, Eric just reached out and wanted to high-five Cameron to celebrate. Cameron held Eric's hand but did not leave. Instead, he squeezed past William Stewart and Drew, who were sitting around Eric, and forced his way over. Amidst the laughter of the surrounding people, William Stewart and Drew hurriedly moved to the aisle with a smile. Eric endured Cameron's bare hug and patted him on the back. He smiled and said, "Buddy, I know you're very excited. Hurry up and go up. Everyone is waiting for you." "Thank you, Eric, no matter what," Cameron said again. He let go of Eric and shook his fist before continuing to walk to the stage. Eric turned around and saw that the girl had already taken his seat. She pointed at her original seat with a smile and said, "You should sit here. I don't want Jim to step on my dress again. It's very expensive." Eric could only sit down at the side and listen to Cameron's fast-paced speech. He asked William Stewart beside him, "William, you'll definitely be going up on stage later. How do you feel?" The Academy Award for Best Picture could only nominate up to 3 people. The original space-time movie Titanic only nominated 2 people, Cameron and John Landau. But this time, as one of the important producers, Firefly put William Stewart's name on the list. Although there were many disagreements during the filming process, Cameron did not object to Firefly's arrangement. "I'm very excited," William Stewart said, then shook his head and smiled. "But this experience is enough. It's too difficult to work with Jim." After a pause, William Stewart said tentatively, "Eric, I would like to be your producer." On the stage, Cameron once again expressed his gratitude to Eric. The camera swept over and Eric smiled and nodded. When the camera left, he said, "That's a good idea. I also hope to have someone familiar with CG special effects to help me. You must have accumulated a lot of experience this time." Jeffrey had been personally responsible for the production of Eric's movies in the early days. After Jeffrey retired, Jerry Bruckheimer took over this position. The two sides also cooperated very happily on Jurassic Park. However, in the past few years, Jerry Bruckheimer had been focusing more and more on his own film and television companies. Although these companies were affiliated with Firefly, he certainly could not be Eric's producer wholeheartedly. After completing Casino Royale with the Broccoli siblings, Eric needed to find a new producer to help him with the production matters. William Stewart obviously also realized this opportunity. When he heard Eric say this, he immediately said, "Then it's settled." Eric could understand William Stewart's eagerness. He smiled and said, "Of course, it's settled." On the stage, Cameron once again shouted the iconic, "I am the king of the world," and left the stage amidst everyone's applause. Then, Al Pacino went on stage to present the Best Picture award. The result was naturally no surprise. Cameron, who hurried back to his seat, got up again and walked to the stage with John Landau and William Stewart. At this point, the 69th Academy Awards ceremony came to a perfect end. Titanic finally won 13 Oscars, creating an unprecedented winning record in the history of the Oscars. It was already early in the morning on the East Coast of the United States, but in Los Angeles on the West Coast, it was just 9 o'clock in the evening when the nightlife began. After the ceremony, most of the guests, regardless of whether they won the award or not, went to parties scattered all over Los Angeles. After a few years of development, Condé Nast Group paid more attention to the brand effect brought by the Vanity Fair party and spent more and more resources to attract the core guests of the Oscars. As a win-win cooperation, more and more superstars and celebrities were inclined to attend the Vanity Fair party after winning the Oscars. Firefly and Condé Nast had already reached a cooperation agreement before the Oscars. They would cancel the individual celebration party and direct all of their crews to the Vanity Fair party. In exchange, Condé Nast's media needed to provide more space for the promotion of Firefly's award-winning film. Therefore, after the award ceremony, the main creators of Titanic and Red Alert rushed to the venue of the Vanity Fair party, the Beverly Hills Arts Center. Eric and Drew got out of the car in the parking lot. Peter Ritchie led a team of bodyguards to separate them from the crowd of crazy reporters waiting outside and escorted them into the Arts Center. As soon as they stepped into the hall, Eric saw a middle-aged man with a bald forehead greet them warmly. "Who is this?" The girl leaned on Eric and asked in confusion. Peter Ritchie had already followed them and whispered in Eric's ear, "Louis Horwitz, the director of this year's award ceremony." The middle-aged man walked up to them, as if he did not notice Peter Ritchie whispering to Eric. He enthusiastically reached out his hand and said, "Eric, congratulations, 13 awards. This is a miracle." "Thank you, Mr. Horwitz." Eric reached out and shook hands with him. He said, "This year's award ceremony was also very good." "Haha, I'm glad you like it." Louis Horwitz's face was glowing as he greeted Eric politely. Louis Horwitz did not leave until the two of them entered the party hall. The girl watched him leave and said, "What an interesting guy. He's so excited, as if he also won an award." "He definitely won an award," Eric said with a smile. He turned and asked Peter Ritchie behind him, "The ratings for this award ceremony should be out, right?" "Yes, Mr. Williams." Peter Ritchie said, "According to the preliminary statistics from ABC, the average number of viewers was 51 million, which is 12 million more than last year. The highest number of viewers was in the last 10 minutes, 55 million. Based on these figures, the price of a 30-second Oscar commercial will be around $950,000, which is 30% higher than last year's. As the director, Mr. Louis Horwitz should be able to get a certain bonus and commission." After Eric heard that, he smiled and said, "See, he did win an award." The girl laughed and said, "Haha, it's definitely not as valuable as the awards we won." Saying that, Eric remembered something and asked Peter Ritchie, "Madonna should be coming, right?" Peter Ritchie said, "Miss Ciccone should be on the invitation list. Do you need me to ask her?" Eric nodded and said, "If you're sure she'll be coming, call someone to send over a few Fireflyer samples. I'll be using them later." "Okay," Peter Ritchie said. Seeing that Eric did not have any other orders, he hurriedly turned around and left. The girl turned her head and looked at Peter Ritchie's back as he left. She smiled and said, "He's a very capable guy, Eric." If that's the case, why did you let him work at FFM? Eric took 2 glasses of wine from the waiter and handed one to the girl. He explained, "Just like Alan, these people should be considered our direct subordinates." Eric originally arranged for his first assistant, Alan Fissman, to be a department manager at ABC. After a few years of training, he had been promoted to the position of vice president of ABC. It was Alan's success that inspired Eric. He decided to continuously select the elites from his assistant office and familiarize them with them for a period of time. Then, based on their individual abilities, he would arrange for them to work in the major companies in the Firefly system to create a direct management team. Of course, Eric would not give these people special treatment. Unless they could prove their strength, they would still face the fate of being eliminated. The girl just nodded as if she understood. The guests in the party hall came up to greet them. She put aside this thought and enthusiastically socialized with Eric in the crowd. As more and more people arrived at the party, the hall became more and more lively. The Titanic crew, who gathered almost all the glory tonight, was undoubtedly the most dazzling group of people. Long after the party began, everyone spent a long time in a series of congratulations and compliments. After about an hour, Eric left alone. Madonna had just arrived at the party and came over to say hello. Eric took a few Fireflyer players from Peter Ritchie, who was waiting on the sidelines, and walked over to Madonna, who was chatting with someone in a booth. Sitting opposite Madonna was a Hollywood male star that Eric was not familiar with. He looked to be in his mid-20s and seemed to have appeared in a popular teen horror film in recent years. Eric could not call out the other party's name for a while, so he just said, "Hey, can I talk to Maggie alone?" Although the young man was a little carried away by the Queen, when he saw Eric, he immediately woke up and misunderstood something. He humbly said with a little panic, "Of course, Mr. Williams, I'll leave now." Madonna looked at the young man who was about to be in her mouth disappear in a puff of smoke and curled her lips. When she saw Eric sitting opposite her, she immediately became interested and began to tease him. "Eric, I was just about to start a new romance, but now you've ruined it. How are you going to compensate me?" Eric had no intention of taking the bait. He had no interest in this cold and unrestrained queen of the music industry. He just casually took out a Fireflyer from his pocket and handed it over, saying, "Here, I'll compensate you with this." Madonna picked up the sky blue Fireflyer and looked at it. Suddenly, she laughed and said, "I've seen it before, and my agent told me that this kind of small thing may seriously hurt the sales of physical records." Madonna glanced at Eric with interest. There was a hint of understanding and ridicule in her eyes, as if she wanted to see how Eric would answer. In the 70s, when Sony first introduced the video recorder, Hollywood also had a similar view as you are now. Universal Pictures and Disney fought a 10-year lawsuit with Sony over this. Eric did not mind the implied rejection in Madonna's words and said, "But today, 20 years later, the annual video sales of Hollywood movies have exceeded $13 billion, more than twice the local box office data of Hollywood. It was the rise of the videotape industry that created the prosperity of Hollywood today. Without the additional profits brought by the videotape industry, no company in Hollywood would dare to make an investment-grade film like Titanic." With that said, Eric took out another white Fireflyer from his pocket again and said, "And what you see now is the future of the recording industry." "It's very interesting," Madonna played with the player in her hand and said, "Eric, I'm not so easy to persuade." "I didn't intend to persuade you tonight. I'm just creating an opportunity for everyone." "Oh, what opportunity?" "Of course, an opportunity for cooperation." Chapter 842. Judging from Madonna's absent-minded expression, Eric's words obviously didn't move her at all. However, Madonna didn't want to appear too strong in front of Eric. She picked up the champagne in front of her and took a few sips. She glanced at Eric out of habit and said with a smile, "Eric, I've never thought of myself as a smart person, so I'm very good at listening to the opinions of my team. Although what you said just now is very reasonable, I still believe what my agent said some time ago. This little thing is called Fireflyer, right? It's a very nice name. However, if this product becomes popular, it will definitely affect the sales of physical records. Record sales are the foundation of our survival. Moreover, my agent also told me that the piracy of music on the internet is very serious, so I plan to stay away from this new field. Even if, as you just said, this little thing will reach the height of the video recorder industry in 20 years, I'll definitely be retired by then." Speaking of piracy, Eric was not discouraged by Madonna's straightforward rejection, and continued, "Maggie, do you know what the internet is like to the music industry now?" In fact, the video recorder example that Eric had just mentioned had already made Madonna's mind waver. The long speech just now was more like a way for her to strengthen her confidence. Madonna had realized that the young man in front of her seemed to be very good at persuading her, but she was very resistant to this feeling. At least, she didn't want to be persuaded on such an occasion tonight, so she even had the idea of getting up and walking away. However, Eric's clever guidance made her curious, and she asked, "What is it?" Eric gently gestured, and his magnetic voice had a hint of bewitchment. He said, "For the music industry, the internet world with more than 100 million users in the world is like a black room, a huge and vast black room." Madonna didn't speak. She tilted her head slightly and continued to listen. Eric didn't stop and continued, "In this empty and dark black room, countless people look forward to the light. They also have enough ability to pay a sufficient price to get the light, but the light treats this space as the land of original sin and refuses to come. When the light abandons them, in order to get the light, people can only steal the fire. This is piracy. The current situation of the internet music industry is like this. It gathers a huge group of people with the strongest spending power in the world. This is beyond doubt. However, the record companies refuse to recognize this huge potential market because of various scruples. They think that by doing so, they can resist the impact of the internet on the physical record industry, but in fact, the result is just the opposite. The boycott of the record industry not only can't stop the strong demand for music, but it will also, in turn, make the internet music piracy more rampant. What's more, the lack of a genuine music sales platform will cause users to become more and more accustomed to free pirated music. The power of habit is very scary. When everyone is used to downloading hundreds and thousands of free songs from the internet at any time and place, do you think they will still be willing to pay for a physical album that costs $20? Madonna raised the corner of her eyes and retorted, "Eric, your assumption is not valid at all. No one dares to spread pirated music on the internet so unscrupulously. People who do so will not only be sued to bankruptcy, but also be sentenced to 1,000 years by federal law." Eric smiled and said, "Maggie, you don't understand the internet, so it's not wrong to think so. But what you don't know is that even if someone is not familiar with the internet technology, they can buy the template structure of a music website with just a few dozen dollars. Similarly, with some money, they can even rent a server in any country in the world without spending any money. Then, they can build a pirated music website that stores tens of thousands of songs. It's easy for these websites to be anonymous, and you can't trace the person responsible at all. Moreover, because of the huge demand for music by internet users, even if 10,000 pirated music websites are shut down for legal reasons every day, thousands of new pirated music websites will appear almost at the same time." Madonna was finally a little moved. Eric didn't stop there. He continued, "Therefore, the most effective way to combat piracy is to establish a legitimate online music sales platform, so that all users have a legal channel to obtain legitimate music. Moreover, from the beginning of this industry's development, the public's habit of buying legitimate music should be cultivated. As I said just now, if there is light in a dark room, although it can't illuminate all the dark corners, at least a large number of people don't need to steal Tinder, and no one will take stealing Tinder for granted. So, Maggie, what do you think?" Madonna paused for a moment before coming back to her senses. With undisguised interest in her eyes, she looked at Eric and said, "After listening to you, I suddenly feel that it would be better if the internet didn't exist." Eric spread out his hands and said with a smile, "Actually, I also feel that if this society could suddenly go back to 10,000 years ago, it would be wonderful." Madonna thought that Eric was laughing at her point of view just now. She curled her lips and said, "Do you really think so?" "Of course," Eric nodded with certainty. He looked across the glass and looked up and down at Madonna, who was wearing a black low-cut dress, and said with a fascinated look, "According to the standards of 10,000 years ago, people should still be naked." Madonna was stunned, and then she laughed with joy. After a moment, she leaned forward slightly, almost lying on the glass, and looked at Eric and said, "Eric, do you want to see what I looked like 10,000 years ago? Why don't we go find a room now?" Eric really wanted to slap himself. He dug a hole for himself. After 2 dry coughs, Eric recovered and said, "Maggie, let's talk about music. Even if you can't sell your new album on online platforms for the time being, I think you can still give the music released in the past a try. These albums that were released in the past definitely can't sell many physical records now, but I believe that if you put them on online platforms, they can still bring you a very considerable income every year." Madonna was not angry because Eric avoided the topic just now. She leaned back on the sofa and said, "But, Eric, I personally don't have the distribution rights of most of my music, so you should talk to Warner." No, I still believe that you have enough distribution rights in this matter." Eric shook his head and said, although Madonna's status in the music industry was not as high as Michael Jackson's, the way she cooperated with Warner Records was the same as Jackson's. The two sides jointly established a music subsidiary responsible for the production and distribution of her own music. This also meant that Madonna had a lot of autonomy in the distribution of her own music. What's more, the internet digital music distribution right now was almost a new concept. With Madonna's status in the music industry, she could totally renegotiate the relevant supplementary contract with Time Warner. It was precisely because of this that Eric spent so much effort tonight. If it was a second or third-tier singer who was completely controlled by the record company, Eric would not waste his breath at all. Madonna saw that Eric saw through her excuse, but she was not embarrassed. She said, "But, Eric, if I do this, what benefits can I get?" "Oh, this." Eric smiled and said, "Yahoo's online music store uses a 30-70 split. The platform gets 30%, the copyright owner gets 70%. If you have full digital distribution rights of your own music, I think you don't need to split it with Time Warner. At least, you don't need to give them too much, right?" Madonna's eyes lit up. At the same time, she also keenly caught a new term in Eric's words. Digital distribution rights? Eric nodded and said, "This should be a new concept. It refers to music distribution that is not related to cassettes, CDs, films, and other physical media. Currently, it refers to the internet music distribution. I think, in the contract you signed with Time Warner, there should not be any clauses in this area, right?" Madonna nodded subconsciously. "So," Eric immediately tempted again, "I think, next, you should renegotiate the supplementary contract with Time Warner as soon as possible to determine the ownership of the digital distribution rights." Madonna blinked a few times, then suddenly laughed and said, "Eric, this is your ultimate goal tonight. If I take back the digital distribution rights of my own music from Time Warner, it will definitely cause the A-list singers of the major record companies to follow suit. Yahoo didn't manage to get the digital distribution rights from the 5 major record companies, but if these rights are distributed to the singers themselves, you can take them down one by one. I have to say, Maggie, you are actually very smart." Eric praised and said, "But, you have definitely wronged me. Do I look like a scheming person to you?" Madonna really looked at Eric again and said firmly, "Yes." "Okay, I'm hurt." Eric clutched his chest and handed the fireflyer that he had just placed beside him to Madonna. He said, "These 2 little things are for you. Someone will pass the rest of the accessories to your assistant. Also, this is my business card. If you have any decisions, you can call me at any time." Seeing Eric hand over his business card and was about to get up and leave, Madonna hurriedly stopped him. "Hey, Eric, you have made so many requests to me. Shouldn't you compensate me with something?" Maggie, I am actually a very conservative person." Madonna rolled her eyes at him. She had flirted with Eric so many times, but he was indifferent. Of course, she would not ask for a rebuff. She said, I am now preparing my own new album. How about you write a few songs for me?" Over the years, although the number of songs Eric produced was very small, almost every one of them had reached a level that could be called amazing. A few hours ago, when Madonna took the initiative to greet him backstage at the Oscars, she actually had this thought in mind. To be honest, her career had begun to decline over the years. If Eric could help her write a few songs that matched the quality of his previous works, it would definitely help her make a comeback even if she did not use Eric's personal fame. Eric was really looking forward to Madonna agreeing to enter the Yahoo Music Store. He did not want to reject her outright. He thought for a while and said, "Get someone to send me a copy of the style of your new album. It would be best if there were a few sample songs. I will try it out. Of course, I can't guarantee it. It needs inspiration. I will get someone to send it to you tomorrow." Madonna nodded quickly. She thought for a while and added, "I will also get someone to negotiate with Warner about the digital distribution rights as soon as possible. In fact, I also have some hopes of working with you. Then, I hope we won't disappoint each other." Eric reached out his hand. Madonna shook his hand and nodded. "I look forward to working with you." Chapter 843. On the night of the 69th Academy Award ceremony, in addition to more than 50 million viewers in North America who watched the ceremony directly through ABC TV, according to subsequent statistics, worldwide, the number of viewers who followed the results of the Titanic Awards through overseas TV stations, online news broadcasts, and various other means exceeded an astonishing 1 billion people. Therefore, the news that Titanic won 13 awards at the 69th Academy Awards ceremony and broke the all-time Oscar-winning record quickly spread to every corner of the world almost as soon as the results were released that night. In this world where the winner was king, regardless of whether the result was controversial or not, the fact that Titanic had created an Oscar legend was a foregone conclusion. Stimulated by the news of Titanic's overwhelming victory at the Academy Awards ceremony, the box office figures of Titanic in North America and even in the world during the week of March 21st to March 27th were all red. In North America, the box office of Titanic in the 14th week rebounded again compared to the 13th week, earning $25.1 million. The cumulative box office in North America reached $517 million, continuing to break the box office record set by itself. The performance of the overseas box office was even more impressive. This week, the number of overseas tickets for Titanic once again increased significantly to 68. At the same time, stimulated by the news that Titanic had created an Oscar-winning record, the box office figures in many countries where the film was released in the early weeks showed a significant rebound. The box office figures in the overseas tickets released in the last 2 weeks were even more impressive. After preliminary statistics, the overseas box office of Titanic in the latest week reached $236 million, very well fulfilling the media's prediction that the overseas box office of Titanic would exceed $200 million this week. At the same time, the global box office of Titanic also reached an astonishing $332 million, directly raising the global box office record from $1 billion to $3 billion. Moreover, no one could predict what the ultimate figure would be. Easter 1997 was on March 30th, which meant that most of the Western countries would welcome the Easter holiday in the next week. Although the length of the Easter holiday varied in different countries, there was no doubt that this popular period would once again boost the global box office of Titanic. Even if the North American box office would show a significant decline after the Oscars, the strong overseas box office was likely to push the global box office of Titanic to $5 billion in the next week. While Titanic continued to attract the attention of hundreds of millions of people, after more than a month of intensive publicity, the date of Firefly Electronics' release of the world's first MP3 player, the Fireflyer, on April 2nd was approaching. Although it was a completely new music player product, under the publicity of Firefly Electronics' free distribution of 10,000 Fireflyer units, this MP3 player had already generated a strong response across the United States. After the Fireflyer trial lottery ended, users who still wanted to buy this player posted on the newly established trading platform on the internet. Some people even raised the price of a Fireflyer to $12 million. Traditional music player manufacturers naturally saw the strong threat of the Fireflyer player to Walkman, CD player, and other players. While they obtained Fireflyer prototypes through various channels for disassembly and research, under the instructions of some traditional manufacturers, many media outlets began to publicize the threat of Fireflyer, a device that could easily spread pirated music, to the recording industry. They even called on the Recording Industry Association of America to sue Firefly Electronics and directly ban the production and sales of MP3 players. In this case, after the Oscar ceremony, the American pop queen Madonna Ciccone opened negotiations with Warner Records for the digital distribution rights of her personal records, which instantly attracted the attention of countless media outlets. Subsequently, the news of Madonna's contact with Eric at the Vanity Fair party quickly spread. This also made Warner Records understand the intention of Madonna and Eric, who was hiding behind her, behind the scenes. Before this, Yahoo Music did not get the online music sales rights from any of the 5 major record companies. Therefore, the major record companies also had a hunch that if Madonna succeeded, many of their A-list singers would make similar requests. At that time, Yahoo could adopt a strategy of breaking down these singers who held the digital distribution rights alone, and the record companies would be in an extremely passive situation. Warner Records immediately rejected Madonna's application for the negotiation of digital distribution rights. Roger Ames, the president of Warner Records, said at a press conference that in order to stop digital music sales, which could easily spread piracy, Warner Records would stop some singers from seeking digital distribution rights at all costs. Digital distribution rights of music should not exist. However, although Warner Records' attitude was very tough on the surface, the private situation was far from so. In 1992, Madonna's career was at its peak. Therefore, although the Cowboy Records company she established was still affiliated with Warner Records, she had a lot of independent control and also held the distribution rights of all of Madonna's records in the past few years. In other words, even if Warner Records did not agree or even recognize the concept of digital distribution rights, with Madonna's control over Cowboy, this company could still authorize Yahoo Music to sell the records released by Madonna in recent years. The reason why Madonna opened the negotiations with Warner Records was to get back the digital distribution rights of many of her records from the beginning of her debut to 1992. Because the copyright of these records did not belong to Cowboy Records, but was still in the hands of Warner Records. Warner Records' firm and rude attitude also aroused the rebellious mentality of the stubborn and fiery singer. On the day Warner Records president Roger Ames made a statement, Madonna publicly said that she would cooperate with Yahoo Music to sell the 3 albums held by Cowboy Records online, and at the same time, she claimed that she would sue Warner Records for the digital distribution rights. If it was an ordinary singer, Time Warner may be able to threaten them with cold storage and so on to make them retreat. But at Madonna's level, because the two sides were almost in a position of equal cooperation, the relevant contract could not bind Madonna. Therefore, these tricks used to deal with ordinary singers were difficult to work on her. The senior executives of Warner Records could only take turns to play the good cop and the bad cop, trying to make Madonna give up the idea of cooperating with Yahoo Music. Of course, Firefly Electronics and Yahoo would not be indifferent. Under Eric's instructions, Firefly Electronics and Yahoo were also very active in offering various favorable conditions to Madonna. While keeping a close eye on the music industry, after the Oscars, Eric's work was busy again. Although there were still 2 months before the summer vacation, the promotional work for the summer movies had already been fully launched. This year's summer vacation was destined to not be peaceful. In addition to a series of high-profile live-action blockbusters such as James Bond, Casino Royale, and Jedi Cop 2, there would be 3 animated movies released at the same time this summer, namely Finding Nemo, produced by Pixar, Ice Age, produced by Blue Sky Studios, and The Lion King 2, produced by Paramount Animation. Obviously, these 3 animated movies were very closely related to Firefly Group. Moreover, as the first sequel to The Lion King that created a global box office miracle of $900 million, The Lion King 2 was undoubtedly the strongest of the 3 movies. When the schedules of the 3 animated movies were announced one after another, Viacom's chairman, Sam Redstone, even confidently announced that The Lion King 2 would beat Finding Nemo and Ice Age. Chapter 844. Easter had just passed. Because he was too busy, Eric did not return to New York to spend Easter with the children. However, he promised the women that he would return to East Hampton before April 10th. The 2 little guys would be 4 years old soon. In a restaurant in Firefly Studios, on a new Monday, Eric and Katzenberg were having breakfast together and discussing the recent 3 animated films released during the summer. The Lion King 2 was released at the same time as Paramount's Stranger in the Wind last year. Although 3 years have passed, the influence of The Lion King is still there. Roger Ailes spent 3 years crafting this movie, and the quality of the animation should not be much worse than the first one. The only thing we can do is to create obstacles for Paramount in terms of publicity. Katzenberg introduced the recent situation, took a sip of juice, and continued, "I have spoken to Mr. Murdoch several times on the phone. In the next 2 months of publicity, there will be no trailers or advertisements for Lion King 2 on all television platforms such as Firefly's ABC television network and Disney Channel. The audience will only see information about Finding Nemo and Ice Age. On the News Corporation side, Fox Network, Fox Family Channel, and other platforms will do the same. We will also try our best to compete for the trailers and advertisements on NBC and CBS. According to the publicity department's estimates, when all these deployments are implemented, the publicity budget invested by Paramount will only reach half of the usual effect." Business competition was never tender. During the promotion of Titanic at the end of last year, Viacom's MTV television station, which targeted the youth audience, refused to release a trailer for Titanic on the grounds that there was a shortage of advertising slots. As the method of comprehensive distribution became more and more common, the importance of film publicity to box office became more and more obvious. This could be seen from the increasing proportion of film publicity budgets in the total investment cost. This time, whether it was a counterattack to Viacom's behavior a few months ago, or a complete ban on The Lion King 2 in the Firefly system out of competition, it was very necessary. Viacom's best TV asset at this time was only MTV. As for the Disney Channel, the number of users was not on the same order of magnitude as the Disney Channel. As the internet had only just emerged in recent years, the current mainstream methods of movie promotion were still TV trailers, print media advertisements, and posters in a large number of public advertising spaces. Among them, the role of TV trailers was undoubtedly the most important, especially for animated movies. After all, a large proportion of animated movie audiences were teenagers and children who did not read newspapers or magazines. The joint ban by ABC and Fox meant that The Lion King 2 would lose at least half of the television advertising platforms in North America. Viacom's own television resources were quite limited, and there was also competition from Firefly and Fox to obtain advertising slots on external platforms such as CBS and NBC. Paramount Pictures would definitely have to pay a higher price for the promotion of The Lion King 2, and the final marketing result would be far inferior to Finding Nemo and Finding Nemo. Eric had already finished the breakfast in front of him and was slowly drinking a cup of hot milk. After listening to Katzenberg, he asked, "Have you considered that Viacom might provoke the ban of The Lion King 2 in the media?" "Of course, the way to deal with it is very simple. Unless necessary, we will ignore it as much as possible. This can also prevent Paramount from using this topic to create hype." This matter had been discussed in last week's meeting. If Viacom made similar statements in the media, none of Firefly's departments would make a public response. Also, we are not doing anything against the rules. If anyone questions, we can provide enough evidence to prove that all the advertising slots in our TV station have been sold out. Katzenberg spread out his hands and smiled with his Totoro teeth. He also made a very vivid analogy. If there is no opponent, a person who punches the air will only make people feel funny. Eric also laughed and said, "I guess after this incident, Lei Sherdong will definitely make up his mind to attack CBS or NBC again. General Electric will not sell NBC at all in the next few years. As for CBS, according to its current market value, Viacom may have to spend more than $30 billion to buy it. With the market share of public TV networks being eroded by cable TV, even if the price was reduced by half, I don't think it's worth it. When we bought Metropolis/ABC, if it weren't for the shares of ESPN and AE Network, it would have been a bad deal." Eric said, "But Lei Sherdong definitely doesn't think so. His mindset is still 20 years ago, when the public TV network was at its peak." In his memory, Viacom had spent a whopping $46 billion to acquire the CBS network. However, after the deal was completed, CBS began to suffer losses due to the impact of the cable television industry. Many years later, in order to avoid being dragged down by the CBS network, Viacom had to separate CBS and its profitable cable TV business from MTV. Lei Sherdong was a very aggressive person, there was no doubt about that. However, perhaps due to the limitations of the era, his vision was always poor. Although Viacom's development was getting bigger and bigger in the consolidation of media groups, it turned out that whether it was the acquisition of the Blockbuster video store chain or the acquisition of the CBS network, it was an extremely failed business. After the new century, Viacom gradually fell from a first-tier media giant to a second-tier media group. The two of them then talked about the distribution of other films during the summer. In the end, Katzenberg hesitated for a moment before saying, "Eric, Barry Weiss and I talked about the recent digital music distribution rights." He felt very uneasy. "I also think that your digital distribution strategy for Firefly Records is too radical." Barry Weiss was a senior official that Firefly had poached from Jive Music, a company under Sony Music. He was currently the president of Firefly Records. In the past 2 years, the Backstreet Boys team that Barry Weiss had personally built had quickly become a first-tier pop singer. Last year, they created the first album to sell more than 20 million albums worldwide. In addition to the Backstreet Boys, the other singers under Firefly Records relied on the rich media resources of Firefly Group, and their development was quite stable. Christina, Britney, Justin Timberlake, and other former members of MMC, after several years of training, had released singles one after another last year and received good feedback from the market. Firefly Records had already launched a plan to tailor an album for them. Eric was very satisfied with the success of Barry Weiss's work in the past 2 years. At this time, after hearing Katzenberg's retelling, Eric was not surprised. He just said, "Jeffrey, you should have seen the digital distribution plan I gave to Firefly Records, right?" Katzenberg nodded and said, "It feels very similar to the phased release of a movie. The physical album release cycle is 3 months. After 3 months, the digital album will be released on the Yahoo Music Store. Although the 3-month window is a little short, it is still acceptable. But then, 6 months after the album is released, it will be split into singles for separate sales." Barry said that this will have the biggest impact on record sales. For many albums, unless they were hardcore music fans, most people tended to only like 1 or 2 of the best songs. In fact, this was also deliberately done by the record company in order to save resources and maximize profits. It was definitely much easier to make a mediocre song than a classic song, and they could also spend less money and energy. If the album was split, it would directly lead to a large number of mediocre songs that no one cared about, which would definitely threaten the survival of the record company that had been formed for many years. "Jeffrey, let's not talk about the pros and cons of this plan for the time being," Eric said. He took out a Fireflyer from his pocket and said, "You must know this player very well, so let's make a hypothesis. If this player was completely developed by your personal company, and you have no interest in the record industry, then in order to promote this machine as much as possible, what would you do?" Katzenberg also realized that the Fireflyer had the possibility of replacing the traditional portable music player market. In the current portable music player market, Sony's Walkman still occupied the mainstream, with annual sales of about 15 million units. The sales figures of other CD players, MD Walkman, and other devices were probably in the same order of magnitude. In other words, the annual market capacity of portable music players was about 30 million units. If they could completely occupy this market, according to the usual net profit rate of about 15% for electronic devices, the net profit of the Fireflyer, which was priced at $299, would be about $45. The annual sales of 30 million units would bring in a net profit of $1. 35 billion. This figure was enough to squeeze into the top 100 of the global corporate profitability list. Katzenberg was also not a person with a strong sense of morality. Considering the terrifying business opportunities contained in this player, he would naturally choose the most favorable promotion and sales method for himself at all costs. He would even secretly condone the spread of online pirated music. As for the life and death of the record company, it had nothing to do with him. According to this train of thought, if he was put in charge of Firefly Electronics, he would not hesitate to completely abandon Firefly Records. Firefly Records had been doing well in recent years, but the annual profit it provided for the group was less than $100 million. Even if it developed to the scale of the 5 major record companies, it still could not compare to the profits that Fireflyer could possibly generate. After all, the output of the music industry was far from comparable to the movie industry. None of the 5 major record companies in the world had annual profits of more than $1 billion. After working together for so long, Eric knew Katzenberg's character like the back of his hand. After seeing his brief pondering expression, Eric could roughly guess what he was thinking. He said, "There is no shortage of smart people in the world." The MP3 audio format was initially introduced 5 years ago. During these 5 years, I can confidently guess that traditional music equipment manufacturers must have had ideas similar to the Fireflyer player. However, in order to protect their own player products and the huge vested interests of the CD, cassette, and other peripheral industries, they will definitely instinctively stop this kind of project. But this result is not the worst. Just like what I just hypothesized, if similar player products are produced by electronic manufacturers that have nothing to do with the recording industry in order to gain more profits, they will definitely ignore the interests of the record companies as much as possible. Not to mention, I'm trying my best to pull the record companies in. They only need a high-sounding excuse, for example, our player can only copy music from genuine CDs, then they can mass-produce and promote this product. As for where users get the music from, do you think they will care? What about you? Katzenberg suddenly asked. Eric, do you care? Eric smiled and leaned back in his chair. He said honestly, No, I don't care. Katzenberg said, Then why are you doing this? Eric thought for a bit and said, Because I want to take the initiative. Or, to put it bluntly, I just want to be the one who makes the rules. I don't want to be stuck in a rut and wait for others to make the rules, or even be eliminated. So, Jeffrey, if you pay more attention to Yahoo, you should find that Yahoo has further developed the MP4 video format on the basis of the MP3 audio format. If the IT industry develops according to Moore's law, in less than 10 years, Hollywood will face a situation similar to the recording industry. At that time, if you want to survive, the easiest way is to become the one who makes the rules, instead of blaming others or blindly resisting emerging technologies. Katzenberg had always admired his young boss's excellent vision in the film and television industry and investment, but he always felt that Eric's character lacked the controlling desire that a leader should have. He was even too gentle in many aspects and lacked aggression. But now, in this small restaurant in Firefly Studios, Katzenberg suddenly realized that Eric's plan was many times broader than his. Not only did he own the present, but he even planned to control the future. Katzenberg even realized that maybe he was just a chess piece in Eric's ambitious plan for the future. A chess piece could not see the entire layout of the chessboard. It could only observe everything within its own fixed route and point at the chess player's moves. Am I willing to be a chess piece? Katzenberg couldn't help but ask himself, but he quickly gave an answer in his heart. Why not? How many people in the world dared to say that they were not chess pieces? But there were too many people who might not even have the opportunity to come into contact with a chess player in their entire life. Now, not only did he have such an opportunity, but he could even consciously create the future with a chess player. This was much luckier than those who lived their lives without knowing what to do. Eric, I have a good relationship with Geffen. Maybe I can call him and invite him to the Fireflyer conference in San Francisco on April 2nd. What do you think? David Geffen's record company used to be a very important subsidiary of Warner Music Group. The music copyright it owned was almost the same as Firefly Records. Katzenberg and David Geffen had always been very good friends. When David Geffen had just left Time Warner, Katzenberg had even suggested that Eric buy David Geffen's record company, but Eric had not agreed. Eric did not know what had happened to Katzenberg's mental state in such a short time, but since he was willing to take the initiative to bridge the gap, Eric naturally would not refuse. Of course, if he's willing, well, we can all get together then. After breakfast, they chatted for a while. Katzenberg then rushed to the Burbank headquarters to attend the weekly meeting, so the two parted ways. Eric's work schedule was also very busy today. In the morning, he had to check the rough cut of Jurassic Park 3 and discuss the post-production special effects with director Joe Johnston and the Digital Domain's post-production team. At noon, he had an appointment with Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay for lunch to discuss the disaster film The Day After Tomorrow project. After all, this project could not be dragged on like this. Eric did not plan to direct it personally, and the company could not wait forever. Coincidentally, after Michael Bay finished Jedi Cop 2, he did not want to film Jedi Cop 3 anymore. Instead, he wanted to try the special effects theme. Jerry Bruckheimer proposed to let Michael Bay direct The Day After Tomorrow. In the afternoon, he still had to rush to the Fox set to attend the final round of auditions for the female lead of Doomsday Angel. Eric was not interested in admiring or even hunting beauties through the auditions. He did not need to go through such a complicated process to get any woman he wanted. However, since he took the initiative to take on this task, he had to show his face symbolically. Because the box office performance of Jurassic Park 2 was almost the same as the first movie, although the option contract was signed in advance, Joe Johnston still proposed to get more money from Jurassic Park 3. The two sides spent 3 months negotiating before reaching an agreement. The script writing and team formation for the third movie were not as smooth as the second movie. Therefore, the planned 2-year production period was extended to 2.5 years. Jurassic Park 3 could only miss the summer and was scheduled for the Christmas season at the end of the year. Jurassic Park 3 had just finished filming on the eve of the Oscars. Jerry Bruckheimer was still the producer. The original appointment was at noon, but in order to understand the special effects production process, Michael Bay came to Firefly Studios with Jerry Bruckheimer in the morning to listen in on the post-production plan for Jurassic Park 3. No one's success was a fluke. Eric was very satisfied with Michael Bay's attitude. After finishing the morning's work, he had already let go of his hesitation and decided to hand over the production of The Day After Tomorrow to him. At noon, everyone directly discussed the production plan of The Day After Tomorrow in the restaurant. Chapter 8:45. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Eric arrived at the Fox set in Century City on time. As soon as he got out of the car, he saw Elizabeth walking over in high heels, followed by an assistant holding a document. Eric hugged Elizabeth and walked out of the parking lot together. He did not forget to ask, "Why are you here?" Elizabeth rolled her eyes and said, "This is my house, why can't I be here?" I mean... Eric wanted to ask why she came to pick him up. Elizabeth was currently only in charge of the film production department of 20th Century Fox. Although the Angel of the Apocalypse project was valued by Fox, it was not under her jurisdiction. However, Eric still shrugged. "Well, the whole set was hers anyway, forget it, I won't talk about it." "Humph," Elizabeth snorted softly, but she leaned over and held Eric's hand intimately. She said, "Dad asked me to talk to you about the digital release of the soundtrack album." "Stop." Eric did not wait for Elizabeth to continue. He quickly interrupted her and said, "Liz, I've spent too much effort convincing others these days. Let me take a break. Let's not talk about music today, okay?" In order to obtain as much music content as possible, Eric formulated the strategy of delaying the release of digital music albums by traditional singers for 3 months. This plan would not only be implemented in the Firefly system, but it also greatly increased the possibility of introducing content from external record companies. However, Yahoo Music Store could not be full of old music content. In order to make up for this, the film and television soundtrack albums in the Firefly system would be released at the same time as the physical albums. Other than Firefly Group, MGM agreed to this plan almost without hesitation. However, Murdoch was not very satisfied with the proposal. However, it was difficult for 20th Century Fox to reject the proposal directly like other film companies. Even without mentioning the private relationship between Eric and Elizabeth, the close cooperation between Firefly Group and News Corporation over the years was even closer than that of MGM. The companies directly held by the two parties included Blue Sky Studio, FFM TV, and the Australian branch of Digital Domain. In addition, just like Eschatological Angel this time, the two companies cooperated frequently in the TV business. Outside of Hollywood, Yahoo Portal had also reached an agreement with News Corporation to enjoy exclusive online news publishing rights for many of News Corporation's media outlets. Elizabeth was also aware of this. The music business under News Corporation was even more insignificant than Firefly, so she did not feel the need to fight for it. Therefore, although she followed her father's instructions to bring up this matter, she did not intend to persuade Eric. Looking at the slightly tired face of the man beside her, Elizabeth nodded, but pretended to be unwilling to give up and deliberately said, "Okay, then we'll talk tomorrow." Eric did not mind Elizabeth's stubborn personality. He smiled and the two of them walked into the administrative building on the set. Although Eric had given Doomsday Angel to Fox to take over The X-Files, everything still went through the proper business process. This sci-fi series was jointly invested by Firefly TV and Fox TV, in addition to one of Cameron's shell companies. The copyright of the TV series was owned by Fox, and Firefly only received a share of the profits based on their investment. Due to the miraculous success of Titanic, although it was only a TV series conceived by Cameron, the competition for the roles was still very fierce. From the very beginning, the production team had set very strict conditions for the female lead Max's audition. The age limit was between 18 to 22 years old, the height between 170 centimeters and 175 centimeters, and she had to have at least 3 years of acting experience. She also had a foundation in dancing, gymnastics, and other physical skills, so she could be suitable for high-intensity action scenes. But even with such harsh conditions, more than 300 girls passed the initial screening and participated in the audition. It was not difficult to see the strength of the UA film industry. The other secondary roles had been determined before, and today was the last round of auditions for the female lead. There were only 10 candidates left in the final round. Although all the girls had already arrived and were waiting in the lounge, the audition would not begin until 2:30. Cameron's mind was now mainly focused on the early special effects research and development of Spider-Man and the Titanic theme exhibition. Other than providing the main plot idea and a producer title, he did not participate in this project and did not come today. Eric listened to the Fox producer in charge of Doomsday Angel, Brian Spicer, briefly explain the early audition situation. He flipped through the 10 documents in his hand and said with great interest to Elizabeth, who was carefully reading the candidate's information, "Liz, have you heard a story about an interview?" The person in charge randomly pulled out a stack of information from the interviewees and threw it into the trash can, announcing that these people were eliminated. The reason was very simple: they were not lucky enough. Elizabeth raised her head and looked at Eric helplessly. She said, "If you wanted to play like this, why didn't you come earlier? There are only 10 people left now. If you pulled out a stack, there would be nothing left." "Then I'll pull out 1 or 2, said Eric. He picked out 2 from the thin stack of information, drew a cross on it with a pencil, and handed it to Brian Spicer and the others, who were a little stunned. He said, "Get someone to inform them that they can leave directly." Elizabeth knew Eric well. She knew that Eric's inexplicable actions often had a reason. Although she could rarely get the reason from Eric, Elizabeth firmly believed in this. Elizabeth snatched the 2 pieces of information from Eric and looked at them. She did not find anything special, so she handed them to Brian Spicer. "Brian, is there a problem with these 2 people?" Brian Spicer took it and looked at it. He hesitated for a moment before telling the truth. "Liz, this girl named Mira Jovovich was introduced by Mr. Palma. However, I can guarantee that there is no problem with her qualifications. She has dancing skills, and she has been playing small roles in movies and TV series since the age of 13. Elizabeth thought for a while and asked, "Brian De Palma?" Brian Spicer nodded. Brian De Palma was a veteran film director in Hollywood. A few years ago, he had filmed the first Mission Impossible. Elizabeth did not care too much. After working for a few years, she gradually understood that Hollywood was a social circle. Moreover, she believed that Eric would not care about this. The problem might lie with the other girl. What about the other one? This. Eli Lander. Brian Spicer looked at the name on the other piece of information and frowned slightly. He then looked at the other people in the audition room. Everyone shook their heads. One of them flipped through the information in front of him. He thought for a while and said, "This girl was selected by John's group. Should we call him to come over?" Brian Spicer looked at Elizabeth and Eric and explained, "John Knowles. We divided the preliminaries into 5 groups. John is the person in charge of the 3rd group." Elizabeth was about to say something when Eric took the 2 pieces of information from Brian Spicer and stuffed them into the folder. He shook his head and smiled. "Forget it. It's just that it's been a little troublesome recently. I don't want to always be the same. Well, let's pretend that nothing happened. Everyone, let's start." Although they did not understand what had happened, Brian Spicer and the others suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Elizabeth's expression froze. She moved her chair, leaned over, and hugged Eric gently. Then, she pulled out the 2 pieces of information that had puzzled everyone. She said to Brian Spicer in an unquestionable tone, "Brian, tell them to leave." Brian Spicer took the 2 pieces of information again. He felt Elizabeth's firm tone and did not dare to say anything. He nodded, got up, and walked out of the room without hesitation. Elizabeth still did not let go of Eric. She ignored the other bystanders and intimately rubbed her face against Eric's cheek. She said, "Eric, do what you want to do. You don't have to explain to them." Eric gently patted Elizabeth's slender waist and smiled. Why do I feel that this sentence came from the mouth of a girl? Elizabeth was not angry at Eric mentioning Drew this time, but she still retorted. I'm not like her. She's crazy. Oh, are you sure you're normal? You're a jerk. The onlookers pricked up their ears to eavesdrop on the two bosses' strange, or rather, words of love. But soon, Brian Spicer, who had just left, pushed open the door and walked in again, breaking the atmosphere. Eric and Elizabeth heard the footsteps and realized the situation around them. They sat separately as if nothing had happened. There were 8 girls left on the list that Eric was completely unfamiliar with. The audition began at 2:30 and ended at 7 o'clock in the evening. Due to the tight schedule, the pilot episode had to be produced before May. Eric did not hesitate too much. After the audition ended, everyone quickly discussed the results. A 19-year-old girl from Pennsylvania was lucky enough to get the role of the female lead, Mike. After the female lead of Doomsday Angel was confirmed, Eric would no longer be involved in the specific production of the TV series. On the afternoon of April Fool's Day, Eric flew from Los Angeles to Oakland, San Francisco. The official product launch of Fireflyer would be held at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on April 2nd. The venue was chosen in the Grand Ballroom of the Oakland Marriott International Hotel. After more than a month of intensive publicity, the Fireflyer's reputation had spread all over the world. However, other than its main purpose, there was still a lot of information about this player that hadn't been made public yet. Therefore, the launch attracted almost all the mainstream media from all over the world. After the date of the launch was confirmed, more than 600 media outlets contacted Firefly Electronics, hoping to get an invitation to the launch. In the Silicon Valley area, where technology companies gathered, although the electronics industry had already thoroughly disassembled the player, they would not miss the opportunity to get first-hand information. In addition to the lucky audience selected by Firefly Electronics through the Yahoo portal, the final guest list reached 2,100 people. Eric watched the preview of Firefly Electronics CEO, Bill Olson, last night and was busy until late at night. He woke up early today. Since the launch would be held at the Marriott Hotel, Eric chose to stay in this hotel. He left the room and walked into the hotel's internal restaurant. Chris was already sitting at a table with the 2 leaders of Firefly Electronics and Yahoo's CEO, Ian Neer, who personally came from Boston. They were discussing something. Good morning, Eric. Ian Neer, who was sitting across from Eric, waved at him when he saw him walking over. The others also looked over. Eric walked over and greeted everyone. He sat down next to Ian Neer and asked, "What are you guys talking about?" The few people looked at each other. Ian Neer took the initiative and said, "Eric, about the pricing strategy of Fireflyer." Eric asked the waiter for breakfast and said, "You guys aren't thinking about increasing the price, right?" Bill Olson said, "Eric, according to our recent research, $299 is the same price as the Sony Walkman. It is indeed a little too low. Based on Fireflyer's popularity, I think it is possible to increase the price to $359 or even $399. But we've discussed this issue many times." Eric shrugged and said, "We all know that the Fireflyer's technical level isn't very high. Even though we've already applied for a series of patents for the MP3 player, as long as our competitors want to work in this area, they can still create an alternative product. So, what we need to do is to make Fireflyer popular as soon as possible and let it become the industry standard. We should not rush for profits from the start. Furthermore, the manufacturing cost of Fireflyer is only $150. With the increase in production and technology, the overall cost will continue to decrease. We already have enough profit margin." Firefly Electronics CEO, Victor Mike, shook his head and said, "Eric, your thinking is not wrong. But I think you have underestimated our technology and patent barriers. I am sure that even an electronics giant like Sony would need at least 3 years to bypass our patent barriers. 3 years is enough for us to complete our MP3 player strategy." Chapter 846. Eric remembered Elizabeth's whisper to him yesterday and did not intend to explain too much. He made the final decision: next year, Seagate will probably be able to launch a micro-hard drive with 2G capacity. At that time, we can appropriately increase the price of different models of Fireflyer according to the capacity. Now and in the future, the bottom line of $299 cannot be changed. Victor, Mike, Nellie, and the others saw Eric frowning slightly. His expression was also a little more indisputable, which was rare in the past. They were very sensible and no longer argued. After breakfast, everyone went to visit Firefly Electronics' newly set up multi-touch capacitive screen laboratory. This was set up after Firefly Electronics acquired a small capacitive screen research and development company in recent months. Compared with the current mainstream resistive screens, capacitive screens undoubtedly had more advantages. This kind of screen was also proven to be the mainstream technology for future handheld mobile devices. Similar to 3D and IMAX in the film industry, capacitive screens and multi-touch technology had been around for many years, but there had been no mainstream electronic products to match them, so the development was slow. Eric believed that as long as the planned Yahoo Pad tablet was launched, capacitive screens supporting multi-touch would soon become the mainstream touchscreens. At this time, Firefly Electronics could also gain more advantages in terms of technology patents. Approaching noon, there were only 3 hours left before the conference in the afternoon. More and more guests who planned to attend the conference began to gather at the Marriott Hotel. Amazon CEO, Jeff Bezos, arrived in San Francisco in the morning. After 3 rounds of capital injections, Firefly Investments already owned 30% of Amazon shares. Under the management of Jeff Bezos, Amazon had also developed rapidly in recent years. Although it had not completely occupied the position of overlord in online book sales, Jeff Bezos could not wait to start Amazon's development in the direction of a comprehensive online retailer. Firefly's online sales was Amazon's first attempt at business expansion. In order to show the importance of Amazon, Eric took time out at noon to have lunch with Jeff Bezos and discuss the next step of Amazon's development. After selling 30% of the shares to Firefly, in order to avoid losing control, Jeff Bezos did not intend to continue financing Firefly Investments and began to prepare for the IPO. Eric was not in a hurry to acquire more shares of Amazon. After all, Amazon's development had not been smooth sailing. There were still many opportunities for Firefly to invest in the future. The two of them were eating and chatting in the Marriott Hotel's restaurant when the CEO of Firefly Electronics, Bill Olson, suddenly walked into the restaurant in a hurry and headed straight for Eric. Bill Olson nodded at Jeff Bezos. Without any hesitation, he said to Eric in an urgent tone, "Eric, Celine Dion's manager, Rennie Ongeli, just called. He said that Celine Dion won't be able to make it to the press conference this afternoon." Eric's mind spun, and he basically understood what had happened. Among the 5 major record companies, Sony was undoubtedly the one that felt the most threatened by the Firefly's launch. They also produced a variety of mainstream portable music players. Celine Dion happened to be a singer under Sony Music. Although Celine Dion's voice could be said to be heavenly, in fact, her personal music style was very simple. If it wasn't for the birth of My Heart Will Go On, it would have been almost impossible for Celine Dion to become a first-tier superstar in the music industry. Therefore, before the release of Titanic, Celine Dion could only be considered a second-tier singer under Sony Recordings. Although Celine Dion's status rose after the release of My Heart Will Go On, she was bound by the contract and could not have the freedom of superstars like Michael Jackson and Madonna. It was obvious that Sony Recordings was pressuring Celine Dion to not attend the Firefly's press conference. Eric hadn't expected that Sony would be so despicable as to put pressure on Celine Dion 2 hours before the press conference. Before he could say anything, Bill Olson's phone rang again. Bill Olson did not answer. He passed the phone to Eric and said, "Ms. Dion just said that she wants to apologize to you in person." Sony was the mastermind behind this matter. Although Eric was angry, he was not so petty as to vent his anger on Celine Dion. He picked up the phone and chatted with the other party for a while. Celine Dion knew the importance of My Heart Will Go On to promote her career. Therefore, she was very respectful to Eric on the phone. She repeatedly apologized and vaguely explained her difficulties. After chatting for a while, Eric hung up the phone. At this time, Chris, Victor, Mike, Nellie, and the others who heard the news also appeared in the restaurant. As this press conference would also announce the release of the Titanic soundtrack album on Yahoo Music Store, Celine Dion could be said to be the most important guest in the afternoon. Bill Olsen purposely put her at the end of the press conference to announce the official release of the Titanic soundtrack album on behalf of Yahoo Music Store. Everyone hurriedly chatted for a while and left the restaurant together. They went to a meeting room specially prepared for Firefly Electronics at the Marriott Hotel to discuss countermeasures. Bill Olsen looked at everyone and said, "It is too late to discuss with Madonna now. However, it is not too difficult to get the Backstreet Boys to praise one more song. It is just that if they go on stage, the following segment will be disrupted." There were originally 3 scheduled guests in the afternoon: Madonna Ciccone, the Backstreet Boys, and Celine Dion. Madonna was naturally not bound by the same restrictions as Celine Dion. Moreover, she had publicly expressed her intention to cooperate with Yahoo Music Store. Therefore, after receiving the invitation, she readily agreed. The Backstreet Boys were the pillars of Firefly Records. Firefly Electronics press conference would naturally not leave them out. Celine Dion was also confirmed early on. However, no one expected that she would be pressured by Sony at the last minute and give up the performance. Everyone had seen the preview of the press conference last night. Naturally, they knew that if they replaced her at the last minute, the details of the announcement of the original album of Titanic on Yahoo Music Store would have to be changed. After discussing for a while, Chris suddenly looked at Eric and said, "Eric, since Celine Dion can't go on stage, you will do it yourself. You are the songwriter of My Heart Will Go On. You have also seen the preview of the press conference last night. There should be no problem." Eric didn't even have time to shake his head before everyone started cheering excitedly. "That's right, Eric. You're going to do it yourself. Your status is much higher than Celine Dion's." In fact, during the planning stage of the press conference, Bill Olsen had hoped that Eric would go on stage to give a speech. However, Eric had rejected the idea. Now that Chris had suddenly suggested it, they were naturally very excited. As the soul of Firefly's system, Eric was surrounded by a series of halos. As long as he went on stage, his influence on the media would definitely be far beyond Celine Dion's performance. Eric reached out and pressed down on the noisy crowd. He smiled helplessly and said, "You are not asking me to go on stage and sing My Heart Will Go On, right? Is that appropriate?" Bill Olsen said, "Of course not, Eric. You can say whatever you want and do whatever you want. Then you can help announce the digital album of My Heart Will Go On for sale." Victor Mike Nelly, who was not very good with words, also agreed excitedly, "Yes, yes, yes, that's it." Ian Neer also smiled and played the emotional card. "Eric, I think you definitely don't want this press conference to be ruined. Moreover, this is your responsibility. The whole of Firefly is yours." Facing everyone's eager eyes, Eric hesitated for a moment and nodded slightly. He said, "Okay, then, let's discuss what I should say when the time comes." Bill Olsen shook his head and smiled. "Oh, Eric, this is your business. We won't be participating. I should go and greet the guests." Victor Mike Nelly simply stood up. The vice president of Best Buy is still waiting for me downstairs. Haha, Jeff just said that he wanted me to discuss with him about Amazon's advertisement on Yahoo. I'll go down first." Seeing Bill Olsen, Victor Mike Nelly, and Ian Neer leave the conference room, Eric turned to Chris. Chris smiled and spread his hands. "I haven't thought of an excuse yet. Forget it. I'll just do whatever I want when the time comes. Even if I mess it up, no one will dare to say anything to me, the boss." Eric simply shrugged and asked about other things. "How are the preparations for your wedding with Emily?" Hearing Eric mention this topic, Chris had a bitter look on his face. "It's still the same. My dad and her parents are much more enthusiastic than us." Eric looked at Chris and could almost imagine the 3 elders chasing after Chris and Emily to discuss the wedding details. He smiled and joked, I'll be going to New York for a week or two. Maybe I can give you some ideas. Don't add to the trouble. Chris shook his head and curiously asked, in 2 weeks, other than Kevin and Shasha's birthdays, do you have anything else to do? Eric nodded and said, regarding the establishment of Marvel Pictures, Avi Allard and the rest have already come up with a preliminary plan. I need to confirm it personally. Chris occasionally heard Eric mention the huge plan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He had too many things to pay attention to, so he did not express much interest in this matter. The two chatted casually for a while before leaving the conference room together. After 12 o'clock, more than half of the guests had gathered in the banquet hall of the Marriott Hotel. The rest of the guests were also arriving one after another. Eric studied the specific plan of the press conference before throwing himself into the activities of welcoming the guests. Eric naturally did not need to personally entertain the media reporters from all over the world. However, he still needed to personally greet the technology giants in the IT industry. As time passed, Microsoft's Bill Gates, Cisco's John Chambers, Oracle's Larry Ellison, Apple's newly appointed CEO, Gil Amelio, and other IT industry executives, as well as Seagate, Best Buy's electrical appliance chain stores, and other partners' executives, appeared one after another. Even Warren Buffett specially rushed over from Omaha. In addition to these technology and investment industry giants, there was naturally no lack of entertainment industry stars who were invited to support the press conference. Katzenberg personally arrived at the Marriott Hotel an hour before the press conference began. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, all the guests had already gathered in the banquet hall. The lights in the other parts of the hall dimmed, leaving only a few beams of light gathered on the stage. As the CEO of Firefly Electronics, Victor Mike Nelly was the first to walk on stage. He announced the start of the press conference and gave a simple speech to all the guests present. In Eric's original suggestion, he did not want the press conference to be too long. Therefore, the entire press conference was expected to be only 1.5 hours long. It mainly included the configuration and functions of Fireflyer and the introduction of the Yahoo Music Store, as well as the introduction of sales methods and channels. Bill Olson had prepared for this press conference for 2 months. Therefore, everything was carried out in an orderly manner. As Bill Olson and the others announced the details of Fireflyer, Yahoo Music Store, and other details, the guests at the banquet hall applauded and cheered. The camera flashes in the hands of the reporters did not stop at all. During this period, countless media outlets had already exposed a large amount of information about Fireflyer. However, the final official announcement was undoubtedly the most newsworthy. When Amazon CEO, Jeff Bezos, went on stage to introduce the establishment of Amazon Fireflyer, Bill Olson, who was the host himself, went on stage again amidst the applause. He was even holding a chair in his hand. The atmosphere at the press conference had been quite lively. Bill Olson's strange action easily caused the guests to chuckle softly. Bill Olson put down the chair and patted the back of the chair. However, he did not sit down as everyone expected. Instead, he raised the microphone in his hand and said with a smile, "This chair is not prepared for me. Guess who will sit here?" Naturally, there were not many people in the banquet hall who could make the CEO of Firefly Electronics carry a chair himself. Very quickly, someone shouted out, "Eric Williams! Eric Williams! Eric Williams!" As the voices became louder and louder, Bill Olson did not keep them in suspense. He raised the microphone in his hand and said, "Then, please welcome Mr. Eric Williams." Amidst the warm applause and cheers, Eric walked up the stairs to the stage from the side. Chapter 847. After receiving the mic from Bill Olson, Eric didn't sit on the chair. This arrangement was completely out of his expectations. He also understood that Bill Olson probably wanted him to stay on the stage for a while longer. Like Bill Olson, Eric patted the back of the simple foldable chair. He looked down at the first few rows of people who were shining brightly no matter if it was in his previous life or in this life. At this moment, they were all looking up at him. Thinking about all the experiences he had in his past life, Eric felt an unprecedented sense of self-satisfaction. The inexplicable emotions that he had been feeling recently were suddenly swept away. After the audience had completely quieted down, Eric held the back of the chair with one hand and said, "I think that when everyone sees a chair, their first reaction is to sit down, especially when you realize that this chair is your seat. However, in the next few minutes, I have to restrain myself from sitting down. I also hope that in the future, I will be able to restrain myself from having such thoughts. Because once we sit down, we will often start to pursue comfort and lose the motivation to move forward." Many people in the audience didn't understand why Eric would suddenly say such a thing. Some reporters even thought that the scene in front of them was a specially arranged show. Therefore, when Eric finished speaking, there was only a polite applause that wasn't too enthusiastic. The smile on Eric's face didn't change at all. He continued, "Many people definitely don't understand why I suddenly said this. I haven't reached the age where I can instill philosophy in people. Actually, this is just a sudden feeling. This chair in front of you shouldn't have appeared on this stage. Just like in the original plan, I shouldn't be standing here right now. All of these changes were made in a hurry 2 hours ago. As for what exactly happened, I think that the hundreds of reporters here will be able to dig out all the inside stories before the sun sets today. The reason why everyone is gathered here today is that you will definitely be able to see the changes that Fireflyer and Yahoo Music Store will bring to the music industry. However, it is obvious that those who have built their own chairs and started to enjoy comfort don't want to see this change. Therefore, they are almost instinctively trying to delay or even stop this change." When Eric finished speaking, there was a buzz of discussion in the banquet hall. The cameras were crazily lit up again. Some anxious reporters even started to make calls on their phones. Eric knew that by revealing what happened a few hours ago, other than causing some trouble for the other party, there wouldn't be any substantial impact on Sony. However, this was just a small counterattack. He quickly continued, "Actually, in this era of technology explosion, all business managers should have a kind of awareness. Rather than being replaced by others, it's better to replace yourself. I admit that the traditional portable music players are very good. They have also brought a lot of joy to our lives. However, this is not a reason to reject change. Technological innovation and advancement are the trends of this era. Now, I can proudly say that Fireflyer is a disruptive and innovative product. However, I still hope that a product that can replace Fireflyer will appear. I hope that the company that creates this product will be part of the Firefly system. As for those who are still guarding their chairs, I will never persuade or even beg you to change. I will tear down all your chairs, and break all the bottles and cans around you. I will make you lose everything." Eric's fierce and arrogant declaration made everyone in the banquet hall fall into a short period of shock and silence. Then, the hall was filled with the loudest applause and cheers of the entire press conference. Westerners generally advocated freedom and publicity, looking forward to being able to break down authority. Eric's words just happened to touch the excitement of many people. The applause and cheers lasted for more than a minute before Eric was able to move on to the next segment. After the Fireflyer press conference ended, starting from the evening paper that day, photos of Eric standing next to the folding chair appeared on the front page of the North American and even international media. His declaration about tearing down the chairs also became the most exciting part of the press conference. However, although the media and the public had strong expectations for Fireflyer, there were still people who poured cold water on it. Just as Eric had said, the media found out that Celine Dion was pressured by Sony Records to cancel her performance at the Fireflyer conference the day after the conference. Howard Stringer, the CEO of Sony's American branch, who was surrounded by reporters, said that Fireflyer relied too much on the CD drive and USB port on the PC hardware. The sales of personal computers in North America in 1996 had reached an astonishing 26 million units, even exceeding the annual sales of traditional household appliances such as color TVs. However, the CD drive and USB port had only been introduced in the last 2 years. Many personal computers did not even have these two ports. Of the 26 million personal computers sold last year, less than 5 million had both CD drive and USB port. Even now, more than half of the mainstream personal computer models in the market did not have CD drive and USB port. Although Fireflyer's price of $299 was very affordable, most families would not upgrade their personal computers worth thousands of dollars for a music player. Therefore, Fireflyer could only be regarded as a niche product for a long time. It could not be compared to mainstream music players such as the Walkman, CD player, and MD Walkman. Eric, of course, knew the situation that Howard Stringer was talking about. Firefly Electronics had calculated the relevant information in their early market research. However, considering the PC sales last year and this year, there would be at least 10 million personal computers in North America that supported Fireflyer connectivity. Eric was very optimistic about Fireflyer sales. Bill Olson also predicted that in the remaining 9 months of the year, Firefly Electronics should be able to achieve sales of 1 million Fireflyer units. In history, MP3 players first appeared in Japan and Korea. They used flash memory storage media, which had a very low capacity at that time. Not only was it expensive, but the number of songs it could store was even less than a traditional tape. It was far from comparable to a microdrive. Therefore, it was not popular for a long time. Apple's iPod, which used a microdrive to manufacture, was also not popular due to Steve Jobs' platform closure strategy. It was not until 2005, when Steve Jobs, under the persuasion of all the senior executives at Apple, agreed that the iPod was compatible with the Windows system, that the MP3 player completely reversed the trend of traditional players. More than 22 million units were sold that year. This number was more than twice the total number of units sold under Apple's closed platform in the previous few years. In Eric's opinion, when the iPod platform was released in 2005, the golden age of MP3 players had actually been missed. As more and more mobile devices began to support music playback, MP3 players were quickly eliminated. At this time, Fireflyer could be said to be a step ahead. It used a microdrive with a large capacity and supported the Windows platform from the beginning. Even though the capacity, functions, and personal computer support were not as rich and convenient as later years, Eric was still very optimistic about Fireflyer's prospects. However, it turned out that Eric and the management of Firefly Electronics were still far from optimistic about Fireflyer's sales of 1 million units this year. After the launch event on April 2nd, Fireflyer officially began to be sold in the Best Buy chain stores in North America and on Amazon and other platforms on April 5th. A total of 25,000 units were sold on the day of the launch. It was not that this number was coincidental. It was because there were only 25,000 units in stock on each major sales platform. Moreover, before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, retail outlets across the United States had already announced that they were sold out. The 5,000 units of Fireflyer in Amazon's online store were also sold out by the evening of the same day. Fortunately, considering that Fireflyer might experience an early sales boom after more than a month of publicity, Firefly Electronics had stocked up on 100,000 units in advance. That night, they quickly replenished the units from the warehouses on the east and west coasts of the United States to the major chain stores. Firefly Electronics' Fireflyer assembly plant in San Francisco also began to release all of its production capacity, increasing the monthly production to the limit of 150,000 units. Although many media outlets treated Fireflyer's hot sales on the first day of the launch as a temporary phenomenon caused by advertising and topical effects, when the cumulative sales of Fireflyer exceeded 100,000 units on the fourth day of the launch, and the daily sales showed no signs of decreasing, everyone changed their views and looked at Fireflyer in a new light. Some retailers even began to raise the sales price of Fireflyer. 100,000 units were sold in 4 days, and 25,000 units were sold in a single day. According to this trend, even if the consumer's interest in Fireflyer cooled down after a period of time, the total sales of Fireflyer in 1997 would definitely be more than 1 million units. As a result, Sony and other traditional portable player manufacturers started to lose their cool. After all, even the best-selling Walkman only sold 15 million units a year. That was less than 50,000 units a day. Moreover, this figure was the total number of units sold in all the major consumer markets in the world. If only the North American market was included, the Walkman's daily sales were no match for the Fireflyer's terrifying sales momentum in recent days. Therefore, on the day that Fireflyer sales figures exceeded 100,000 units on the 8th of April, Sony Records could not wait to announce that they would file a lawsuit with the federal court in San Francisco. On the grounds that Fireflyer would promote the spread of online music piracy, Sony Records requested a ban on the production and sales of Fireflyer players. The next day, on the 9th of April, a Gulfstream V commercial jet landed at a small private airport on the outskirts of East Hampton, Long Island. The CEO of Firefly Electronics, Victor Mike Nelly, and the president Bill Olson, got off the plane and boarded a black Bentley car that was waiting for them. In just a few days, the two of them could be described as crazy. However, success came too quickly and too fiercely. The two of them were also in a state of intense excitement. Fireflyer had achieved $30 million in sales in 4 days. Even if the consumer's enthusiasm cooled down and the sales figures dropped by half in the future, Fireflyer sales this year would not be less than 3 million units. This meant that the annual sales would reach $1 billion. $1 billion, for a company that had just started, was simply a miracle. The two of them would also receive very generous bonuses and options as a result. Of course, the basis for all of this was that Firefly Electronics had to achieve production expansion as soon as possible. After all, Firefly Electronics' current San Francisco factory only had a monthly production of 150,000 units. It was simply not enough to meet the market demand. Victor Mike Nelly and Bill Olson originally had a full schedule for the next week in order to discuss various new cooperation agreements with part suppliers all over the world. However, Eric suddenly called them in the morning and asked them to fly to New York to meet him. He even sent a plane under Firefly Electronics to pick them up. Although Victor Mike Nelly and Bill Olson hoped that everything could be resolved through a conference call, Eric's attitude was very firm. The two of them had no choice but to board the plane and rush over. The Bentley drove into downtown East Hampton. Victor Mike Nelly was still not satisfied with Eric's arrangement. He muttered softly, "Eric might want to discuss the lawsuit that Sony Records is about to file with us. I feel that this worry is completely unnecessary. After all, based on the similar lawsuit that Sony Records received in the past, there is a high possibility that the federal court will directly reject Sony Records' lawsuit and will not file a case at all. There is a case law system in American law, which is to use the previous court cases to form the basis for the judgment of the subsequent similar cases. In the past, Sony's VCR was sued by Disney and Universal for 10 years for copyright infringement. In the end, Sony won. This time, the lawsuit that Fireflyer may face is almost the same as the case of Sony Records. According to the case law, the federal court will basically reject Sony Records' lawsuit directly. But no one knows how the higher-ups of Sony will feel when they realize that the basis of this lawsuit being rejected was the power that their company had spent 10 long years to fight for. Bill Olson looked at the driver in the front seat. He was more familiar with the ways of the world than Victor Mike Nelly, who focused on R&D, so he did not complain like Victor Mike Nelly. He just smiled and looked at the streets outside the window. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked the driver, "Mr. Moan, are there any good gift shops nearby?" Carter Moan looked at Bill Olson through the rearview mirror and said, "Of course, it's not far ahead." Bill Olson said, "Then please stop for a while." "No problem." Carter Moan smiled and nodded. Victor Mike Nelly asked in confusion, "Why are we going to a gift shop?" Bill Olson was a little helpless with this straightforward but slightly low EQ partner of his. He could only lift his leg and kick him, signaling him to shut up with his eyes. When Eric was in San Francisco a few days ago, he mentioned by chance that he was going to East Hampton to celebrate his two children's birthday. Eric did not hide the fact that he already had children from them, which showed that he was very close to his two children. Although he did not know if the two children's birthday had passed, since he was going to rush over, it was not polite to come empty-handed. Carter Moan quickly parked the car outside a boutique store in the center of East Hampton. Bill Olson pulled Victor Mike Nelly out of the car and picked out two good birthday gifts. The car then drove to the seaside manor that Eric bought in East Hampton. The car drove into the manor. Victor Mike Nelly and Bill Olson followed Virginia into the villa. The two soon found out that there were actually two female owners in this manor, because the one who served them coffee was Joanna Pakula, who once played the female lead in Tornado. Eric, on the other hand, was wearing a casual light-colored sweater and casual trousers. He was playing with Lego blocks with his two 4-year-old children in the corner of the living room. There was an inexplicable harmony in the strange atmosphere. Seeing the two of them walk in, Eric came up to them with a little boy in his arms. Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson pretended that they did not notice and gave the gifts. After Eric thanked them, he smiled and introduced to the two of them, "This is my son, Kevin. This is Shashya, my daughter." Eric did not introduce the two women too formally. Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson felt more relaxed because of this. Then, they smiled and greeted the two little guys like two weird uncles. The little boy turned his head to his father's shoulder a little timidly. The little girl with beautiful big eyes looked at the two of them curiously. She also did not respond to the two of them. This made Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson feel a little awkward. Everyone casually chatted for a while. Eric got up to bring the two of them to the study room to discuss some matters. Virginia walked over and wanted to take Kevin. Eric just shook his head and said to her, "Let me do it. Also, Jeff Bezos will be here later. You guys ask him to wait for a while." After that, Eric walked to the stairs with Kevin in his arms. Seeing a small figure behind them walking over, Eric smiled and said, "Baby, you can't follow us." Hawaii looked at Kevin, who was still in her father's arms. She blinked and said, "Dad is biased." Although this sentence was a complaint, Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson always felt that the little girl's tone was a little strange. If they were to describe it in a literary sentence, it seemed that her feelings were not full enough. She lacked too many emotions that a daughter should have when she was acting coquettishly to her father. However, they did not dare to delve into it. They looked at each other and quietly followed behind Eric. Eric did not seem to hear his daughter's complaint. He just smiled and said, "Stay in the living room obediently. Don't make any trouble." In the light laughter of Joanna and Virginia, the little girl saw that her words did not work. She obediently stopped and watched her father bring the two guests up the stairs. Chapter 848. After Eric, who was carrying Kevin, and the other two disappeared around the corner of the stairs, Joanna stepped forward and held her daughter's little hand. She smiled and said, "Okay, baby, Dad has something to do. If you follow him in and ask him a lot of questions, you will drive him crazy. Let's go and see if your birthday cake is ready. We can also go to the supermarket while we're at it." The little girl seemed to have forgotten that she had just been rejected by her father in the blink of an eye. There was no frustration in her tone, but she was also not interested in her mother's suggestion. She raised her little face and said, "Mom, can I watch TV?" Joanna shook her head and said, "No, you can only watch TV at night." The little girl felt a little bored and was about to obey her mother when Virginia came out of the kitchen after clearing away the coffee cups. She heard Joanna's words and said, "Let me go. It's not convenient for you to bring Shashya with you. You can wait at home for Mr. Jeff Bezos to come over." Joanna did not insist. She sent Virginia and a maid off and took her daughter for a walk on the lawn in the front yard. About 10 minutes later, another black car drove into the manor. Jeff Bezos got out of the car and saw a quiet and intelligent woman walking over with a little girl. Although Joanna had not been in the film industry for years, her appearance had not changed at all from when she was filming Tornado. Jeff Bezos recognized her at a glance and guessed the identity of the little girl who was curiously looking at him. Jeff Bezos smiled and reached out his hand to Joanna. He said, "Hello, Ms. Pakula. I'm Jeff Bezos. Mr. Williams asked me to come over." "Hello, just call me Joan." Joanna shook hands with him and smiled. "Eric is talking to two other gentlemen. Please come with me." The three of them walked into the living room of the villa. Joanna personally served Jeff Bezos a cup of coffee and said, "Please wait a moment. I'll go up and take a look." "Oh, thank you." Jeff Bezos, who was sitting on the sofa, got up slightly and watched Joanna leave before he sat down again. Then, he felt the curious gaze of the little girl sitting on the sofa next to him. Unlike Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson, who were excited and busy these days, Jeff Bezos' first thought was to expand the sales of Fireflyer on Amazon's platform. He was not in a hurry to introduce more products. Instead, he planned to use the opportunity of selling Fireflyer, a popular product, to further expand Amazon's influence in the field of e-commerce. He had even been proposed, to Victor Mike Nelly, to cancel the physical sales and make Amazon the only retailer of Fireflyer. But unfortunately, he was directly rejected. Although Eric did not tell him the so-called reason for coming to New York on the phone, Jeff Bezos still did not give up on this idea. Even if he could not achieve a monopoly of supply in the end, he still hoped that Amazon could have more sales. As Fireflyer's current production capacity was far from meeting the market demand, this was actually the demand of all retailers who worked with Firefly Electronics. Jeff Bezos wanted to think about how to persuade Eric to give more support to Amazon. However, the little girl's bright and clear eyes in front of him, as well as the gaze that seemed to be able to see through people, made him feel very uncomfortable. He could not concentrate at all. Even before the establishment of Amazon, Jeff Bezos had become the youngest vice president of a bank trust company at the age of 25. He could be said to be an absolute elite. Therefore, he realized that he hadn't felt the same way as the little girl in front of him for many years. Jeff Bezos was never a person who was used to being passive. He straightened his back and was about to say a few words to the little girl. The little girl blinked her beautiful eyes and took the initiative to ask, "Other than English, what other languages can you speak?" Although the little girl's voice had the softness of a child, her tone was not childish at all. She did not have the timidity of a child of the same age when facing a stranger. Jeff Bezos felt even more strange. Facing the little girl's eyes that were waiting for his answer, Jeff Bezos even felt that if he did not speak other languages at this time, he would definitely be ignored by the little girl. He subconsciously did not want to be ignored by a little girl, and this passive situation made him feel even more uncomfortable. Therefore, he decided to take back the initiative. He put away his expression and said, "Hey little guy, that's really rude. You haven't told me your name yet." "Hawaii Williams," the little girl blinked and replied. Jeff Bezos twitched the corner of his mouth. It was not because of the seemingly ridiculous name of Hawaii. Instead, he actually felt from the little girl's expression that the little girl obviously saw that he was just pretending and disapproved of it. Jeff Bezos tried hard to convince himself that everything was an illusion, and then continued, "Well, Hawaii, why did you ask me the question just now? Mom knows Polish and Russian, Aunt Vicky knows Spanish, Natasha and Evgenia know Russian, Drew is an idiot, he can't speak anything except English." The little girl frowned slightly when she mentioned Drew. Her expression finally changed a little and she continued, "Mom said Dad knows Chinese, it's the most difficult language in the world to learn. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to teach me. Aunt Vicky hired a French teacher for Kevin. French numerals and grammar are very interesting. Unfortunately, she was driven away by Dad a few days ago. Dad said Kevin doesn't need to learn so many things. In fact, Kevin is not stupid at all. He knows that as long as he stays by Dad's side, Aunt Vicky won't force him to learn anything." The little girl spoke very quickly and her thoughts were quite jumpy. After she finished blabbering, she continued to stare at Jeff Bezos. "What about you?" I. Jeff Bezos hesitated and said, "I know a little Spanish." The little girl immediately switched languages and asked in Spanish, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" The little girl's Spanish pronunciation was not very standard, but her sentences were quite fluent. Jeff Bezos guessed that this was obviously a problem with the teacher's ability. But what surprised him even more was that since the little girl could switch to Spanish so fluently, could it be that she also knew the other languages that he had just listed? Jeff Bezos knew Spanish because of his family environment. His stepfather was from Cuba, and the lingua franca of that country was Spanish. But in addition, Jeff Bezos also took French as an elective in university. So he tried to answer in French, "I'm a businessman, and now I'm running a website that sells things through the internet." "Oh, I've seen the introduction on TV. Unfortunately, my father didn't allow me to touch a computer before I was 12 years old. I bargained with him until I was 6 years old." The little girl really understood and even switched to French without any difficulty. Her pronunciation was obviously much more standard than the Spanish sentence just now. Then she asked, "Then, is there any difference between selling things through the internet and a supermarket?" This question was obviously a bit big. Moreover, Jeff Bezos knew that with his little French foundation, he could not explain it. Subconsciously, he no longer treated the little girl in front of him as a little girl, and he did not realize that the little girl had been unknowingly controlling the initiative of this conversation. Frowning slightly, Jeff Bezos was hesitating about how to phrase it when Joanna had already come down from upstairs. Noticing the situation here, she immediately understood what was going on. Her expression was a little helpless and obviously doting. She walked over to touch her daughter's little head and apologized to Jeff Bezos. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bezos. Did Shasha disturb you?" Joanna's appearance broke the atmosphere that the little girl had unknowingly created. Jeff Bezos also immediately came to his senses and looked at Hawaii with some surprise. He did not expect that one day he would be controlled by a little girl who looked at most 5 years old. He also did not know that he had overestimated the little girl's age. Although he felt a little strange, Jeff Bezos quickly shook his head and smiled. "Of course not, Ms. Pakula Xia. Shasha is very smart." Joanna smiled and said, "Eric has almost finished talking with the two gentlemen. He said that you can go upstairs. The study is at the end of the corridor on the right." Jeff Bezos nodded and got up to walk to the stairs. On the way, he could not help but look back at the living room. Hawaii had already moved to Joanna's ear, and the mother and daughter were whispering something intimately. Jeff Bezos subconsciously wanted to know what the little girl's evaluation of him was, but soon he shook his head in self-mockery and secretly wondered what was wrong with him today. Jeff Bezos knocked on the door and walked into the study on the second floor. He shook hands with Eric and the other two and sat down on the sofa in the corner of the study. His eyes could not help but fall on the little boy beside Eric. The little guy did not look special. He was quietly playing with a Lego in his hands. When he saw Jeff Bezos coming, he even moved closer to his father. This made Jeff Bezos secretly relieved. Everything seemed to be normal again. Eric did not notice Jeff Bezos's gaze. He picked out a document from the stack of documents on the coffee table and handed it to him. "Jeff, take a look at this proposal first." Jeff Bezos nodded and opened the folder. There were 2 words printed on the cover: hunger marketing. On the other side, Eric flipped through another document in his hand and continued the topic just now. He said to Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson, like Firefly Electronics, Nokia also experienced the crisis of the supply chain on the verge of collapse in 1995, but they handled the crisis very well. Last year, they surpassed Motorola and successfully reached the #1 position in the digital mobile phone sales. One of you is in charge of research and development, and the other is in charge of marketing. Both of you do not have enough experience in the supply chain. Therefore, I have already communicated with Yoma Alala. They will send a deputy manager of the purchasing department to be the vice president of Firefly Electronics. He will be responsible for the construction of the supply chain. It is necessary for Firefly Electronics to expand Firefly's production capacity, but the proposal you have given is actually a mess. It is completely expanding production blindly. Therefore, after the other party rushes to San Francisco, I will give you 3 months. In 3 months, in order to ensure the quality of Firefly's products, the monthly production needs to be maintained at 150,000 units. However, after 3 months, I hope to see Firefly's production capacity double. Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson looked at each other. Bill Olson said, "Eric, Firefly's production capacity should be increased slowly. It cannot be done overnight." "Of course, that is why I am giving you 3 months," Eric said. "Within 3 months, I do not need to see an increase in Firefly's production capacity because I have other arrangements. You only need to focus on building the new factory and contacting suppliers. Even if production can be achieved in advance, the monthly production can only be maintained at 150,000 units. However, after 3 months, I want to see the results that I hope to see. You know why I separated Firefly from Yahoo Music Store. If you can't complete it, I will authorize Nokia to produce MP3 players." Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson were all stunned. They naturally knew how powerful Nokia was. Firefly Electronics had already transferred the full set of patents for MP3 players to Nokia. However, the contract stipulated that Nokia could only develop and produce MP3 music phones. They could not be involved in purely MP3 players. However, if Eric lifted this heavy restriction, it would be difficult for Firefly Electronics to compete with Nokia. They might even be reduced to a purely technical R&D department in the end. Eric had already given Firefly Electronics enough support. Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson also knew that Eric was not joking at all. If they did not do a good job, all the bright prospects that they had originally envisioned would vanish into thin air. Without bargaining, Bill Olson took the initiative and said, "Eric, we will do our best." Victor, Mike, Nellie, also nodded. Eric smiled. The serious expression from just now gradually dissipated. He said, "Then, let's discuss the cooperation plan with Amazon now." As he spoke, Eric handed the two documents that were similar to Jeff Bezos's to the two of them. He said, "The reason why I gave you 3 months is to push this plan forward." Victor, Mike, Nellie, and Bill Olson had just opened it for a short while when Jeff Bezos, who had quickly finished reading the information, said excitedly, "This is wonderful, Eric. This is simply a genius idea." Eric smiled and nodded. He said, "Of course I think so too." The plan in Jeff Bezos's hands was naturally the famous hunger marketing in his previous life. This kind of marketing plan could not only stimulate the consumption desire of potential buyers to the greatest extent but also maintain the popularity of the product for a long time. It could also achieve large-scale promotion of the brand at the lowest price and the fastest speed. Chapter 849. In order to carry out hunger marketing, there were usually some necessary conditions. Either the price was lower than similar products, or the product was in high demand. The price of the Fireflyer was definitely not low. Due to the recent shortage of demand, retailers had already raised the price to more than $300. Strictly speaking, the price increase by retailers would not bring any benefits to the Fireflyer brand. Therefore, in the discussion between Eric and the two people in charge of Firefly Electronics, they had already decided to limit the retailer's price increase to $30. Otherwise, they would stop supplying the product. However, at the same time, the price increase of physical retailers also provided a more favorable opportunity for Amazon to carry out hunger marketing. In the proposed plan, Amazon would obtain a supply of 50,000 Fireflyer units per month, and the sales price would remain unchanged at $299. They would also carry out online purchases once every 3 days, which would be exactly 10 times a month. The entire hunger marketing cycle would take 3 months. Fireflyer had already done an excellent job in traditional marketing, which was also the reason why sales were booming. However, Fireflyer was a brand new electronic product after all. Many traditional portable music players were still in a wait-and-see state. The implementation of hunger marketing would not only maintain Fireflyer's strong popularity for a long time, but it would also create a deep-rooted concept in people's minds in a short period of time. At the same time, it would also completely stimulate the purchasing desire of all potential wait-and-see users. In addition, Amazon's platform could also obtain more traffic and users in a short period of time through this marketing plan. It could also open up the e-commerce market outside of book sales. Therefore, this plan could be said to have the effect of killing multiple birds with one stone. The four of them spent the entire afternoon discussing the details of the implementation of the plan. In the end, Jeff Bezos suggested, "Eric, I think 3 months is too short. In my opinion, even after 3 months, Fireflyer will still be in a state of shortage for a long time. Why don't we extend this plan?" Eric decisively shook his head. He did not want Firefly Electronics to become a company that did not know how to survive without hunger marketing. He said, "Although the effect of this marketing plan is very obvious, it can't be regarded as a traditional marketing method. If we keep doing this, it will definitely cause a strong backlash from users. Therefore, we should focus our energy on developing better products and building our brand. In fact, if it weren't for this opportunity that is very beneficial to both Fireflyer and Amazon, I wouldn't have come up with this plan." By the time they finished discussing everything, it was already evening. However, Victor, Mike, Nellie and the other two didn't stay for long and left East Hampton in a hurry. After the children's lively birthday party, Eric also rushed to New York the next day and began to discuss the details of the establishment of Marvel Pictures with the team of Marvel Entertainment. Midtown Manhattan, in the conference room of Marvel headquarters. All the executives of the various departments of Marvel Entertainment were gathered together today. Even the founder, Stan Lee, had rushed over. The CEO of Marvel Entertainment, Avi Arad, stood in front of a projector and personally explained the Marvel Cinematic Universe storyline that Marvel's creative department spent more than a year developing. Eric had initially provided a simple draft based on his memories from his previous life. Then, Marvel's creative department filled in the content, resulting in today's result. At this time, Marvel had basically recovered the copyrights of all the core heroes, and even Captain America, who had been in a stalemate at the beginning, had been taken back. Therefore, the new Marvel Cinematic Universe plan was grander than the original space-time, and the characters would be more varied. The new Marvel Cinematic Universe plan storyline also began with the Avengers, but then the scope of the story would expand to the entire universe, with various major events as the main storyline and the 6 Infinity Stones as the hidden line. In turn, it would lead to the Guardian of the Galaxy and the Infinity Watchers team similar to DC's Seven Lantern Corps. It took Avi Arad a full hour and a half to explain the overall idea. Stan Lee, who was sitting next to Eric, had been quite excited during Avi Arad's explanation. Putting Marvel's superheroes on the big screen was almost one of the most important wishes in his life. However, after Avi Arad finished, Stan Lee recovered a little and asked Eric with some uncertainty, "Eric, this plan is really exciting, but don't you think that it is too difficult to really implement it? According to my understanding of Hollywood, no one in Hollywood can always guarantee the success of a movie, not to mention this huge plan involving dozens of movies. As long as there are 1 or 2 movies that fail at the box office in the process, the whole plan is likely to be ruined." Everyone obviously heard Stan Lee's question, and they all looked at Eric quietly. Although they were excited about the huge idea of the Marvel Cinematic Universe plan, they also had similar concerns. After all, wishes are usually beautiful, and reality is often cruel. Feeling the questioning and hopeful eyes around him, Eric explained with a smile, "Of course, I am also aware of this problem. Therefore, for a long time in the future, I will be personally responsible for Marvel Pictures to ensure that there will be no implementation problems caused by the disagreement of the senior management during the implementation of the plan. Secondly, this plan can be described in detail as a comic serialized movie plan, which means that the style of the movies in the plan will maintain a high degree of uniformity. As long as the first few movies of the plan are commercially successful and accepted by the audience, as long as the following movies do not suddenly change the style, the possibility of failure will be very low." After Eric's voice fell, someone immediately asked, "Mr. Williams, the Marvel Cinematic Universe plan is so huge that it will definitely need to use many different directors. The personal style of each director is different. This problem seems to be impossible to solve. We will not refuse to cooperate with big-name directors, but the premise is that these directors must adapt to the style of Marvel movies. Otherwise, we would rather not cooperate. There is no room for negotiation on this point. On the other hand, we will also try to use new directors with good potential, because these people will cherish the opportunity more, and therefore it will be easier for them to adapt to the style of Marvel movies." There was a buzz of discussion in the conference room. Eric could roughly guess what everyone was thinking. He just smiled and sipped the coffee in front of him. Stan Lee did not have other concerns. He was the first to ask, "Eric, if a large number of new directors are used, I think, perhaps, it should be difficult to make an outstanding comic adaptation of the movie, right?" Eric did not evade. He nodded and said, "Generally, according to the standards of film critics, it should be like this." Everyone began to whisper again. This time, Eric did not wait for them to ask. He said, "First of all, everyone should be clear that all the movies under Marvel Pictures should only pursue commercial success. Others, such as the evaluation of film critics, the perception of the core comic fans, and so on, are irrelevant. Only in this way can the whole plan be implemented smoothly. At the same time, in order to be able to implement the Marvel Universe plan, we must also sacrifice the diversity of the movie style. Whether it is the director, screenwriter, actor, or producer, of course they can have their own style, but no one's personal style can be above the overall style of Marvel movies. To put it bluntly or cruelly, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe project, all the actors, screenwriters, directors, and other creative personnel are just screws in the Marvel Cinematic Universe project. A machine is absolutely inseparable from the screws, but the screws can never get control of the machine. There was a moment of silence in the conference room. Stan Lee said again, "Eric, but if that's the case..." Eric took the initiative to interrupt the old man's question and said, "Stan, there are two choices in front of us. The first choice is to pursue the quality of the movie and use the best production team we think. The director and actors can use their talents to their fullest, and we will try to limit them as little as possible. But the result is that some of the movies produced will be good at the box office and reputation, some will be good at the box office and reputation, and some will be bad at the box office and reputation. This will lead to some of the superheroes being popular, and some of them being eliminated from the market. In the end, the Marvel Universe plan is destined to be unable to go smoothly. The other choice is to maintain the consistency of the overall style of Marvel movies. Maybe we can't create a classic movie that can be remembered in the movies, but the probability of failure is very low, so we can ensure the smooth implementation of the Marvel Universe plan. Two choices, Stan, which one will you choose?" With that, Eric looked at everyone and asked again, "Which one will you choose?" No one answered, but the answer was self-evident. Of course, if someone objected, Eric would naturally not be stingy with a severance package. After discussing this issue, Stan Lee asked again, "Eric, what about the cost?" As far as I know, Hollywood sequels rarely have more than 3 episodes. This is mainly because once the movie is successful, the actors will be paid more and more. Eric realized that old Stan Lee had obviously done a lot of preparation before, so his question was quite accurate. However, Eric had also considered all aspects of the problem, so he quickly answered, "In terms of actors, it's similar to the selection of directors. We won't refuse to work with A-list superstars, but the premise is that they must be willing to sign a long-term contract. As for the remuneration, as long as the movie's box office is good enough, we won't be stingy, but we must agree on a plan that both parties can accept in advance. However, I'm actually more inclined to use second and third tier potential actors. Hollywood has never lacked actors with good acting skills. If we use newcomers, it'll be easier for us to sign a package contract. Compared to A-list superstars, actors who sign a package contract will also have less uncertainty when shooting a sequel." After Eric finished speaking, everyone couldn't help but feel a wave of doubts in their hearts. If the director used newcomers and the actors used second and third tier actors, then did the Marvel Cinematic Universe really have any future? Eric also quickly realized this emotion from everyone's expression. He smiled and said, "I know you're worried, but the success of a movie, whether the director and actors are big names or superstars, has never been the most important thing. If you don't believe me, you can recall the history of Hollywood movies. Not to mention a long time ago, even in the last 10 years, there have been countless Hollywood movies where newcomers or unknown actors have created box office or word-of-mouth classics, such as Beverly Hills Detective, Three Fathers and a Baby, Lethal Weapon, Ghostbusters, Jedi Cop, The Matrix, and so on. These movie series that once occupied the top of the box office rankings, the original directors or actors were actually not that famous. On the other hand, A-list superstars with high salaries like Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Kevin Costner have frequently produced big projects in recent years that have caused the movie companies to lose all their money. After Eric finished speaking, the expressions of many people in the conference room relaxed. Eric explained the doubts in everyone's hearts. Seeing that everyone was no longer asking questions, he opened the memo in front of him and said, "Now, let's discuss some of my suggestions for changes to the plan you have made. First of all, I have already said before that X-Men will be separated and become a sub-universe of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I still see too many X-Men characters in this plan, and this has to be changed." The meeting continued, and only a small number of topics were discussed until dusk. In the following week, everyone would continue to discuss various details, so Eric was not in a hurry. After work, he specially invited Stan Lee to have dinner with him at a nearby restaurant and listen to the old man talk about a lot of movie suggestions alone. At 9 o'clock in the evening, after sending Stan Lee off, Eric got into his car and drove all the way to a building near Central Park on Madison Avenue. Taking out a birthday cake and a bouquet of flowers prepared by his assistant from the car, Eric entered the building and took the elevator to a duplex mansion on the top floor. This was the residence that Eric had arranged for Giselle and Alexander to live in. He had purchased a large number of luxury properties in New York and Los Angeles over the years. Except for a few that he lived in himself, most of them were taken care of by a luxury rental company under his name. Giselle and Alexander lived in one of these apartments at this time. After collecting the two last year, Eric gave them a bunch of keys. The mansion was located on the top floor of the building on Madison Avenue. Although it was a block away, they could still see Central Park. The view was very good. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.